Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is story about what if Anko is impressed by Naruto skills during the Chunin exam and train him secretly. Part 1. Before I start, please do support for more amazing content and comments for part 2. Do consider to subscribe my channel and share my video to your friends and check out the description as well. Let's start the video. Fight me team. A loud obnoxious voice sounded throughout the nearby area. The figure in black stopped, turning his head towards the noise. Idly pushing his glasses up, he leaped up into the nearest tree and began sprinting across the branches through the trees. He mildly noticed his chakra forming subconsciously to his needs. As he pushed off from the branch, arching through the air and landing on another, he suddenly came to a stop. Lowering his chakra output, his eyes quickly scanned the clearing. The boy with dark hair and onyx eyes, blue shirt and white shorts with a red and white fan on the back of the boy's shirt. He smirked. Uchiha Sasuke. Idly breezing his eyes over the rest of the crowd of teenagers, he noticed them surrounding the Uchiha boy and another. Blonde hair, blue eyes, whisker marks. White t-shirt and blue shorts, his eye twitched. The Kyuubi brat. The boy was pointing at the Uchiha child with a squinty-eyed expression. The brat suddenly charged at the Uchiha after something that was said. Throwing a wide punch at the Uchiha, he watched with a smirk as the dark-haired boy leaned back, allowing the fist to fly by, quickly followed up by a vicious elbow into the blonde boy's stomach, knocking the wind out of him. The Uchiha smirked before lifting his leg and sending a powerful kick into the blonde's chest, sending the boy spiraling across the ground and rolling in the dirt before skidding to a halt. The boy coughed before spitting up some blood. Stupid brat, it was obvious where that punch was headed. He shouldn't have been dumb enough to think that was going to bring the Uchiha boy down. The figure pushed his glasses up his nose again. However, the Uchiha was defiantly arrogant. Had the Uzumaki boy had a little more training, that kick and that elbow would have been a deadly mistake. His musings were cut short when he saw the rest of the crowd cheer. An annoying pink-haired girl and blonde-haired girl were cheering for the Uchiha boy. Meanwhile, he noticed the boy was walking forwards towards the downed Uzumaki brat. Odd, he didn't think that kick was that strong. Suddenly he noticed it and smirked. Perhaps I was wrong about you. He watched as the black-haired boy went to slam his foot down on the blonde-haired boy. As his foot was coming down, the boy suddenly rolled into the Uchiha's other leg hard, bringing the boy down the ground. The Uchiha with a startled expression on his face. The blonde boy quickly capitalized on this opportunity and rolled on that boy and began throwing punches before catching a hard fist to his face, sending him flying backwards and off the Uchiha. Flipping to his feet, the Uchiha glared at the Uzumaki boy, a trail of blood running down the corner of his mouth. The figure's eyes narrowed as he noticed the boy beginning to form seals. He noticed the tiger seal right off, and his eyes widened as he watched the rest with a growing fear. That jutsu for a friendly spar. He will kill the boy. He watched with a grotesque interest as the Uchiha finished his seals. Pain. Kikaku no Jutsu. The Uchiha brought his hand up to his lips before blowing a large fireball towards the still recovering blonde. The blonde-haired boy looked towards the coming fireball with an odd look as he seemed to be accepting his fate. The figure grew angry as he disappeared from his perch on the tree. Uchiha Sasuke watched with a grim satisfaction as he saw his fireball heading towards the still not recovered blonde. He heard the rest of the academy students in awe at his high-level jutsu. He waited a few more seconds before he stopped blowing fire. Hopefully that should get the stupid brat and teach him he needs a new profession. Sasuke waited while the smoke began to clear, his anticipation growing with every second that passed by. However, the smirk on his face paled once the smoke and dust cleared away, revealing a large rock dome that was covering the area the dobe was in. There was no way that dobe knew a technique like that, no chance at all. He noticed the rest of the class has shut up, as well as the highly advanced technique. The rock dome suddenly began to break apart and fall away, and he and the rest of the academy students were staring at a man dressed in all black, a black bandana to cover his hair and tied behind his head. Black sunglasses rested on the bottom of his nose, however the hate in his eyes seemed clear. "How dare you, you disgrace of a shinobi," the man stated balefully. He pushed his glasses up his nose and looked over his shoulder to the blonde-haired boy. Thankfully he was fine. But had he not have interfered, the boy's career as a ninja would have been over. "Who are you?" the Uchiha asked in a clearly annoyed voice. Somebody had taken away his opportunity at showing the dope his place. "Trash like you don't deserve to know who I am, you're a despicable disgrace of a shinobi. Using such an aggressive technique on a spar with a fellow academy student. You're lucky if I don't go right now and have you thrown out of the academy," the man said bitterly. The rest of the academy students grew quiet at that. "I was merely showing the dope his place, not like anyone will care what happens to him." Sasuke's voice broke the rest of the academy students out of their reverie and they began to shout their agreements. The man looked on disgustedly. He turned his back to the group and faced the Uzumaki boy. "Come here, Uzumaki-san. We're going," he said, his voice straining from the hate he felt at those annoying students. "Eh? Where are we going?" Naruto asked curiously, his eyes squinting awaiting an answer. We're going to talk to Hokage-sama, Uzumaki-san, after that I'll treat you to some ramen, eh? The man stated, meanwhile pushing his glasses up his nose. He cringed as heard the screech from the boy. "HHH. Ramen. Sweet." Naruto cheered loudly as he bounced to his feet and jogged over to the man. The man bopped him on the head before forming a few one-handed seals and touching Naruto's head. He gave one last baleful look at the rest of the academy students before both he and Naruto disappeared in a swirl of leaves. Nah. What's your name anyways, guy?" Naruto asked for what must have been the 100th time during his and the black-garbed man's hike up the stairs of the Hokage's tower. Ibisu rubbed the bridge of his nose before pushing his glasses up, setting them properly on his nose. He stopped, turning to face the boy and noting as the blonde smiled, seeing his irritating ways getting him what he wanted. "I'm going to have to beat that out of you, no doubt, boy." Ibisu growled bitterly in his own mind before thought over the question. "Suppose, since I'm going to be training the boy anyways," turning and continuing up the stairs. "Ibisu-sensei, or sir to you," he sighed, still pondering his actions. It was confusing at best. One moment he was coming back from a mission and the next, well, he would see where this would go. "Wah? Does that mean you're gonna teach me really cool jutsus so I can impress Sakura-chan?" Naruto screeched excitedly, however, as the words left his mouth he nearly fell down after bumping into the man who had stopped quite suddenly. "Eh? Would you stow?" "Shut up," the man hissed venomously. He turned facing the boy, his golden eyes shining over his black sunglasses, narrowed, and a small amount of killing intent pouring out enough to make the boy raise his hand awaiting a hit. "Firstly, you are to remain quiet. Screeching and yelling whether it be in a supposed ally village or not gives your position away. Everybody is your enemy. Your best friend could become a traitor or your very worst enemy the next day. Secondly, jutsu are not a plaything. To use them to impress some girl is not only foolhardy, it is completely dangerous and irresponsible. Jutsu," he continued, "are weapons used by tools to a village. They are used to take life and to assist you in being able to gather information and detain enemies. Not for you to gain some bratty princess's attention or to beat a snob. If these are your reasonings, then you should just go home now and never become a ninja." Ibisu's voice was sharp during the lecture. He pushed his glasses back up onto his nose before turning and began climbing the stairs once again. The side of his mouth quirked a little after hearing the footsteps of a curious little blonde boy following behind him. Good, the boy knows enough to at least listen to what I was saying. Ibisu and the boy finally arrived in the main lobby on the top floor of the 5-storied Hokage tower. Raising his arm and pointing to a chair to the left, he looked back at the boy over his shoulder, not saying a word. Naruto quickly nodded and jumped into the seat, idly thinking over the man's previous words. Smiling slightly, Ibisu turned to face the receptionist. He noted the glare she was sending towards the blonde boy. His eyes narrowed behind his glasses as he slid his papers towards her, watching her lazily as she reviewed the paperwork half filled out by the gate guard. She nodded and scribbled something down. Looking up, she handed it back and motioned towards the door guarded by two Anbu. "Hokage-sama has been expecting you, Ibisu-san," the receptionist said within a merry tone. He turned towards the doors after retrieving his paperwork and walked towards the doors. He knew the Anbu would watch the boy from the biased receptionist. Their lives would be at stake if they didn't, and something happened to the boy right outside the Hokage's office. Knocking twice and waiting, he opened the door and stepped inside after hearing the old Hokage's voice. Turning and closing the door behind him, he moved into the middle of the room in front of the desk and bowed, handing over his papers. He stood at attention. The old Hokage took the papers and looked over them while puffing on his pipe. Ibisu stood motionless. Finally, after what must have been 10 minutes, the old man looked up. "Report," he said sternly, his hard eyes staring at Ibisu's face. "Hi, Hokage-sama. Infiltration successful, sir. My 6-month mission to Kumo could not have gone any better. Going in as a wandering Konohinin, I was welcomed and under Anbu surveillance for the first 2 months. Afterwards I became a jounin in their ranks and began accompanying their shinobi on missions. It was during this period I met a Chunin who had informed me in passing about a secret weapon that they had available that only the Raikage was able to control, sir." Further, Lintel revealed that this so-called weapon happens to be the Nibi no Nekomata, the two-tailed cat demon. It seems that she has been under the control of the Raikage for numerous years. She is currently being personally trained by the Raikage and is being trained to be able to take her demon's form. She is a Chunin, almost jounin ninja in Kumo. However, after reviewing her fighting style and being on a mission with her, I have come to realize that she is merely high genin if low Chunin at best without the aid of her demon. After of course she moves into her demon form, she loses complete control, nearly destroying the entire town we were in while hunting down a Nukenin from Kumo and of course her team, myself included. Ibisu winced remembering the incident. She had ended up shattering his collarbone and nearly killing him as well. "Anyway, sir, from the beginning the Anbu captain had a beef with me, didn't trust me at all. After discovering the location on our turncoat, I was able to infiltrate his building and assassinate him. The difficulty came in when the captain was visiting the man. Thankfully a spy I had early poisoned their drinks and the poison was already eating away at his chakra coils. After the elimination of both the target and the Anbu captain, I quickly unsealed the body I had taken the form of and framed the scene. Kimitoro Shanjo was killed in action after discovering and eliminating a traitor to Kumo. However, in the process my Chunin spy has been recognized of killing the Anbu captain and foiling a military coup plotted against the Reikage. As such he has been promoted to Anbu and is currently starting Anbu training in the coming weeks. He will have access to any files we may need in the future. Hokage-sama. Ibisu finished his report with a smile at his skillful work and bowed once again. The Hokage smiled, trust Ibisu for whenever you needed such a delicate situation handled. Nodding and handing an envelope over to Ibisu. Good work Ibisu-san, your payment has been transferred into your account and here are your effects. Ibisu reached over opening the envelope and pulling out his headband, tying it around his arm. He reached back in and slid the golden band onto his finger, staring at it sadly he looked back up. Dismissed. And good work Ibisu, the Hokage said before looking back down to his work. Excuse me Hokage-sama, but I have another thing I wish to discuss with you. Ibisu said hesitantly, thinking exactly the words he would use. The Hokage looked up and gently leaned back in his chair, puffing out a small ring of smoke and taking the pipe from his mouth. Nodding his head for Ibisu to continue he sighed. I came across a most interesting boy today Hokage-sama. I wish him to become my apprentice. Ibisu rang off almost instantly, his eyes never wavering from the sandames. The Hokage however was shocked, not only to find a boy interesting, but to find one that Ibisu himself thought could live up to being his apprentice. You of course know what this would mean Ibisu? The Hokage asked while staring at the man. Curiosity growing in the old man's mind, which genin could have such an impact on the normally uninterested man. Hi, Hokage-sama. It means I am responsible for him in every way. Ibisu recited, having thought a lot about it during the last few minutes. The Hokage seemed to nod. Very well Ibisu, who is the genin the Hokage asked finally, this would take some paperwork to do. Ibisu grimaced. The Hokage misunderstanding the meaning sighed. You know very well Ibisu that I can't have anybody above genin who isn't already on their way towards your department to be your apprentice. The Hokage said somewhat disappointed he would have to deny the man's wish. It's not that Hokage-sama. The boy is not a genin, he's an academy student. Ibisu said slowly. The Hokage's eyes widened. Ibisu, you realize I cannot at all agree with this. Unless the parents were acceptable with the decision I cannot in good conscience agree for you to teach an academy student how to become a weapon, let alone one as good as you need to be. The Hokage was now highly surprised that at such a young age, some boy had managed to impress Ibisu enough for him to want to not only teach the boy, but to make the boy his apprentice. The boy has no parents, he's an orphan Hokage-sama Ibisu said finally. He knew the Hokage would figure it out. Wait, orphan, in the academy? The only male orphan in the academy is Naruto. The Hokage's eyes suddenly narrowed as he looked at Ibisu. Are you telling me Ibisu that you wish to train Uzumaki Naruto? A dangerous edge to the man's voice. Ibisu flinched, who couldn't really. Sitting the presence of the man once known as the professor and the Sandame Hokage. Hi Hokage-sama Ibisu finished. The elder man's glare seemed to intensify. Dumping the remains of his pipe into the trash bin beside him the Hokage looked up. Do you realize I refuse of course Ibisu, you will not be training Naruto-kun. I'm quite ashamed of you for that matter, you need to realize Naruto is not the thing that took your wife and child from you. He is the jailer of the Kyuubi no Kitsune, and I'm quite sure that Maiko-chan would be quite disappointed in you. The Hokage's stare remained. Rubbing his eyes he sighed, he was getting too old for this stuff. Assassinations he could deal with, they were blunt and obvious, however someone asking to train the boy just to gain the boy's trust and then kill him was just despicable. Ibisu was speechless, he then realized the suddenness in his request and of course could easily understand the Hokage's reasoning behind his motives. His heart felt a sharp pain as the Hokage's word finally got to him. Maiko-chan would be quite disappointed in you. Hokage-sama. You don't understand sir. I don't wish harm upon the boy, I already realize he isn't the Kyuubi sir. He nearly died today sir, seeing him there, in front of a fireball, and yet he had no fear. He was just so accepting. Seeing the Hokage's surprised look he explained the situation from earlier that he had witnessed. You see Hokage-sama, seeing the boy like that just reminded me of Ryu-kun. Besides, I cannot teach my skills to anyone else. This boy though, he wants to prove himself to a deeper level to these people. I can teach him to do that, but I wish to teach him because of the potential he has. I can mold him Hokage-sama into a real shinobi, but if he stays in the academy, he will only get by his teaching. You should have seen his basic academy stance, there were more openings in it than you could believe, a civilian could have beaten the boy, and to be honest, I'm sure it's already happened. It's like the academy wants to kill him Ibisu argued loudly. The Hokage's eyes seemed to be clouded over, minutes went by as the Hokage then spun his chair around to face out the window overlooking his village. I'm sorry for doubting you, Abisu-kun. Abisu was taken back by the age in the village leader's voice. A loud sigh escaped the lips of the veteran Cage. Turning back around, he faced Abisu looking as old as his age appeared. Abisu had never seen his leader look so vulnerable before. If this is to be done, it must be quick. I will fill out the paperwork immediately. While the council holds no sway over the decisions of our military, Naruto is still technically a civilian until he graduates. He will be your apprentice, Abisu. I trust you to train him to the best of your abilities. You will have mission leave until an evaluation has been taken. 6 months shall sound good, and even then you will be restricted to B and A class infiltration missions. Understood. The Hokage's voice quickly returned to the hard edge of a shinobi seen too much in his life. Abisu nodded. Hi, Hokage-sama. The boy, he's outside your office right now. I told him you may wish to speak with him. The black-garbed man spoke quickly. Sandame smiled at the man in front of him. Always thinking ahead, Abisu-kun. Very well. Inu-san, the Hokage called out gently. The door opened, allowing the Anbu with a dog mask to poke his head inside the door. Hi, Hokage-sama. The Anbu stared at his leader awaiting his orders, jumping into the mouth of hell if so ordered. Please send in Naruto-kun. The Hokage watched as the man nodded and disappeared, only to later be replaced with a much shorter and blonde-haired blue-eyed boy. The door closing behind him, Naruto walked into the middle of the room sitting beside Abisu. So Oji-san, is this guy gonna teach me or what? Naruto asked, quite hoping for a positive outcome. He shifted his gaze after feeling a small amount of killer intent, starting at his soon-to-be black-garbed sensei, and noticed the man's cold gaze on him. What? Naruto asked stupidly. It's Hokage-sama. It seems manners will most defiantly be one thing that shall be our main lessons until I deem you a fit young person of our gracious society. Abisu muttered before facing the smiling Hokage. Ah, yes, Naruto-kun. Abisu-san here will be your sensei if you want him to be. I will let him explain. The Hokage turned his sights towards Abisu as the man turned to face Naruto. Very well. Naruto-kun, I will tell you immediately that you have potential, great potential to be one of the greatest shinobi of Konoha. As soon as the words left his mouth, he immediately thought he should have rethought them as Naruto scratched the back of his head and puffed out his chest in pride. However, frankly, as you are going. You suck. Abisu smirked slightly as the boy seemed to almost face plant into the ground. You are easy to anger and allow it to cloud your judgment. Your taijutsu sucks, and you know no jinjutsu or ninjutsu. You have a great tactical mind, only when you use it though. If I'm to train you, it will be brutal. Abisu stared at the boy who looked up at him with his blue eyes filled with determination. You wish to become my apprentice, this means you will immediately be classed as a genin, and you will be bailed to forego the regular graduation exam. As my apprentice, I will teach you everything I know. Diplomacy, strategy, evasion techniques, stealth, weapons training, demolitions. I will teach you to be able to look at information quickly and pick up what is important. I will teach you chakra control and how to hide your chakra signature, as well as gen, nin and taijutsu. If you are to become my apprentice, you will learn the ways of being an infiltration expert. You will someday be expected to also be able to assassinate targets, but that will come in the future. Uzumaki Naruto, do you accept? Abisu's voice stern and never wavering, he hoped the boy would accept, and judging from the boy's stance he would. I do, Abisu-sensei. Turning to the Hokage, the boy bowed. I wish to become his apprentice, Hokage-sama. Abisu smiled as the boy referred to the Hokage in a respectful tone. The Hokage nodded as he reached into a desk drawer, pulling out some papers. He began to fill them out. Looking back up, he faced the duo. Very well, Uzumaki Naruto, as of this moment you are now genin of Konoha under the instruction of Abisu. 6 months from now you shall face an examination. If you pass this examination, you shall begin missions with Abisu to that of B rank and A rank infiltration missions. Abisu-san, I will be expecting great things from your student. Dismiss, the Hokage said before nodding at the two. As they turned around to walk out the door, he called out. Aren't you forgetting something, Naruto-kun? The Hokage said, smiling. Reaching into another desk drawer, he pulled out a Hytate 8. However, the difference in this headband was it was not only wrapped with a black cloth, but the metal itself was a black obsidian that seemed to absorb light. The Konoha leaf in the middle of the metal plate was engraved with a light white color. Naruto walked back, taking the headband and wrapping it around his right bicep. He looked back at the Sandame before bowing. Arigato, Hokage-sama. The Hokage smiled before waving his hand lazily at the boy. The Hokage watched with a smile as the new apprentice and master left the room. Waiting a few moments, he finished off his paperwork before looking back up. Inu-san, once again the dog-faced Anbu looked in the door. The Hokage's face grim and serious. Gather the council, there is a matter I must speak with them, the Hokage said with a growl. It was time he would put the council in their place. The large group of people mumbled with an air of curiosity. Everyone was unsure what the Sandame had called this immediate meeting for. Danzo sat back watching the ongoing chattering with interest. He would see where this would lead. Perhaps a new chance for a weapon, he smirked evilly. His plans would come to play soon enough. Suddenly everyone grew quiet as the Hokage walked through the main chamber doors, his arms folded neatly behind his back as the speed of his walk allowed his robes to ripple in the wind slightly, flanked by his two Anbu bodyguards. The man stared up into the council room and looked around as the rest of them began to grow silent. Minutes had passed and yet a word had been spoken. Finally one of the members decided to speak up, a most honorable elder, and in fact the Hokage's ex-genin teammate. "Why have you called?" She got out before Sarutobi fixed her with a harsh and withering glare. "Silence," he hissed. His eyes cold as steel as suddenly the council began to realize the Hokage's intentions during this meeting. "It has come to my attention that another attempt at Uzumaki Naruto's life came into play just last night. The man was given to Ibiki for interrogation and then executed immediately. He gave only one name." With a blur of movement, Sarutobi's hand flashed from under the hanging robes of his sleeves, a kunai blurring from his grip and landing neatly in the throat of a woman near the top row. The rest of the crowd gasped before looking back towards the Hokage, stunned, his cold eyes watching as the life drained out of the council member. Turning to the Anbu on his right, he whispered to them. The Anbu nodded before disappearing. The body of the council member followed him quickly. "So it seems once again the council has ignored my law." Drastic measure was taken. "You all know the rules. No, you are lucky that no one else was named before Ibiki got tired of his game. From here on out Uzumaki Naruto is a shinobi of Konoha. As such, any attempts on his life makes it an attack on Sunagakure, making it an act of treason, which will be immediately penalized by death." The council gasped. The demon boy had become a genin. How is that even possible? How is that possible? Hokage-sama, he is still in his second year of the academy, just starting if I was correct, Danzo said with a bitter smirk. Danzo knew himself to be correct. Normally that would be true, however, due to Article 69 in Konoha Bylaws Section 2, any shinobi above Chunin rank may take on one apprentice. That apprentice will immediately be ranked as a shinobi, even if listed previously as a civilian. The Hokage said with a wicked smile. Ironic that the one law they created to get the Uchiha a better chance of an apprentice, they only succeeded in giving their most hated child one instead. Danzo grimaced. He had been the one to initially push for that particular bylaw to be made. He noticed some of the council members' glares on him. "Oh? And who is this sensei of one Uzumaki Naruto anyways?" Danzo's voice straight like an arrow and never wavering. "Ibisu," the Hokage said, smirking. He watched the uproar it caused, most in a riot while others, the few who respected the boy for what he was, watched on sadly. "Very well, we demand that Ibisu take his apprentice on the next A-rank infiltration mission, available to adequately test the boy." Humura spoke up. Suddenly once again the Hokage's glare was back up and sent her withering. They were no longer dealing with a weak-hearted Sarutobi. This wasn't him. This was Sarutobi the Sandaime Hokage, the professor, the 69-year-old veteran of shinobi. "You dare demand something of me? I am the Hokage of Sunagakure. I am the military leader of this village, and you dare try to demand something of me? Let alone a mission that will lead to the death of a young boy and possible even his instructor. My patience with you despicable people is thin enough. I call this meeting to inform you all that as of this moment, anyone caught harassing or involved with harming, physically or mentally, Uzumaki Naruto will result in the punishment of treason. He is now my soldier, and attacks against him will be taken like attacks against any of my men. Understand this and understand it well. I will not see this village fall because a council of ignorant people deny to see the good in that boy. That is all. This meeting is dismissed," the Hokage growled. Turning around he stalked out of the council chambers, leaving the loud and irritating council behind him. Naruto groaned. His arms and legs were sore. He had one no make that two bruised ribs. He could feel his forearm in a searing pain, but he wasn't sure. The bright side was, finally he had landed a hit on Ibisu, spitting up a large glob of blood. He shuddered as he looked up to see Ibisu casually standing there, guard open and defenses down. However, if there was one thing Naruto learned in his 2-week training period, was that Ibisu was never defenseless, his guard was never down. He had been taught the basic katas to the style he was learning, however whenever he tried to use it, Ibisu seemed to get inside his guard and pound his face in, or his leg, or his ribs, or whatever other extremity that hadn't been damaged at the time of the attack. However, the silver lining to the entire training regime seemed that Naruto no longer ran head-on into his fight. It always got him hurt worse than if he took his time. "You did well, Naruto, but if you're going to sit there then I'm going to have to come to you," Ibisu said blandly. Naruto grimaced, flipping to his feet and reassuming his stance, legs shoulder-length apart, crouched at the knees and arms down towards his sides, right arm outstretched at the elbow facing Ibisu with his hand out lazily, left pulled to his side, fist clenched ready to strike like a viper. He had remembered the brutal beating that he had received when Ibisu had last came to him. Studying his opponent, Naruto just couldn't fight off the nagging feeling like he was missing some point to this slaughter. Ibisu sighed. It seemed Naruto was still hard on to understand the true lesson to this. He was not some overrated ninja who would say, "Look underneath what did that even mean? Eyes focusing, he noticed Naruto's thinking look, shown brightly by the squinty eyes, as he seemed to study not only his opponent but the problem he was no doubt finally uncovering. He was out of his usual black garbed clothing, instead he was wearing a black pair of long pants with side pockets and a kunai holster attached to both his right and left thigh, a shuriken pouch on the back of his belt, and wearing a grey t-shirt. Of course, the t-shirt and pants were lined with a very thin chainmail. Not enough to make noise, but enough to throw some protection from possible projectiles. His hair still tied back by his black high-tailed as well as his black sunglasses pushed up to the bridge of his nose, Naruto had seemed shocked that he wore something other than his usual mission outfit. Thinking back to the events of his first week, he realized that the boy was progressing faster than he thought. If he could figure out what this test meant, then he would then push the boy back to their chakra control exercise. The light seemed to shine behind the boy's eyes as he perked up. Ibisu carefully observed the boy. Perhaps he has it this time. The boy rushed forward suddenly. Ibisu sighed in annoyance while watching carefully. Naruto grinned as he charged forward. This would work, he hoped. Because if not, I'm gonna get a worse beating than when I insulted the Hokage in Sir's presence. Just as he reached within striking range, he fired his right hook. Ibisu leaned back to let the fist sail harmlessly by. Smirking and expecting the move, Naruto sent his left fist forward with a rapid movement. Ibisu grabbed his arm by the wrist and sent it to his left, sending Naruto off balance. Sending a chop to the back of Naruto's neck, he sighed, annoyed that the boy still hadn't got it. Shocked however was he when Naruto disappeared to be replaced by a log. His senses kicking in, he quickly shot backwards, letting Naruto and his fist sail by where his head would have been, jerking a knee up and feeling it connect with the boy's gut. He smirked before it disappeared once again. This time another log appeared, however a sizzling had him look over the log, loaded to the brim with burning explosive tags. Shit. Ibisu threw his arms in front of himself to shield from the log of death. A large explosion blasted into the forest area, a cloud of black and grey smoke rising into the air high above the canopy of trees. Dust settling, Naruto dug himself out of this bushes he was hidden in a few yards back. Observing the damage, he looked around fearfully. Good work, Naruto, a familiar voice came from behind the boy. Turning around, he saw Ibisu standing behind him unharmed and smirking at the blonde. Pushing his glasses up his nose and looking down at the boy, he turned and began to walk off back towards the main part of the city. Naruto jogged to catch up with his sensei before walking beside him soundlessly. What was the purpose of the test, Naruto? Ibisu asked, slowly going over the events in his mind. Naruto was getting better at a rapid rate. In only 2 weeks he was farther along than he thought he would be at 1 month. It seemed he had underestimated the boy. With proper teaching, the blonde had a knack at learning. When you can't beat your enemy, blow him up? Naruto asked, smiling. He had obviously gotten it right or Sir wouldn't have ended the training. Stopping, Ibisu snapped his head to stare at the boy. The blonde sighed. Sorry sir, that if your enemy is stronger, do whatever it takes to win. He asked somewhat hesitantly. Ibisu nodded and continued walking. Not exactly right, Naruto-kun, but very close. Explain to me this, the difference between Gai-sensei and Kakashi-san. Ibisu stated. The boy needed to learn the lesson himself if he was to ever truly understand it. Just handing him it would serve no purpose. Looking at the boy out of the corner out of his eye, he saw the boy open his mouth before closing it. But Naruto, think before you speak. You learned your lesson the last time you spoke stupidly, and boy had he. Kakashi-san is a renowned expert in ninjutsu and has been also known as Copy Nin Kakashi. Where Gai-sensei has been known as a taijutsu expert, though not the only ability he has, it's his highest achievement. Naruto said, pondering what the lesson this would bring. With Ibisu, there was always something to learn. Very good, now for example, given the situation. If you are to sneak into a heavily guarded mansion, number of guards unknown, enemy nin reported but unknown numbers and abilities, who is your best bet to take on this mission? The man stepped into their commonly used restaurant, a small place on the outskirts of the village market near Naruto's apartment. They had been eating here since Ibisu had told the blonde of his new dietary schedule. Naruto followed him without question. Ramen was good if he was cheap and had no money. He liked the stuff, he admitted. But it wasn't like he wouldn't eat anything else. Obviously, if attempting to sneak in, your best bet would be a taijutsu specialist. Naruto recited off immediately. Suddenly his eyes widened as he realized the man's motives. As they took their seat and Ibisu placed his order, Naruto continued to think over the things he had been learning. Very good, Naruto, the true goal of the lesson we just attended was that you must do things effective with minimum effort. Civilian guards to take care of, simply render him unconscious or eliminate him, no waste of effort, no use of chakra to alert other possible enemy nins to your position. Jutsus are well and good and each one has their uses, but are you really going to use an offensive jutsu against a single guard? They make noise and most of them make a mess. When taijutsu you can quickly and efficiently take the man out and still have chakra and techniques left for the duration of the mission. As for Jinjutsu, the techniques are effective, but once again, they take up chakra and leave a residue if enemy nin is good enough to detect it. He sighed, remembering such a mission he had previously been on. Naruto, the main thing I'm tutoring you on, the reason I have you looking through bingo books and other history books along with maps and things at night is because you need this information to be effective. Guy-san is teaching his team to become effective soldiers, you however do not have the luxury of being a soldier. You are to become a ninja, you must know all that you can about everything. Ibisu watched the boy carefully, studying the blonde as his eyes flashed through numerous emotions. Awe, shock, anger, and then determination. I am going to make sure you survive, Naruto. The world of shinobi there is no honor, get that out of your head right now. There is no honor in our work, I've had to kill men, women, children, and I guarantee that you will know no worse horrors than that of killing a child. But we do it to save our village, most don't know it, but our missions that make the most money aren't escort or protection, it's assassination, Naruto. We kill, and we get paid to do it, when you and me begin missions you will have to kill. Ibisu watched as the boy shook his head angrily. I don't like it, the man glared at the boy, his golden eyes narrow over his glasses at the boy. You don't have to like it, he said venomously. You just have to do it. I have not liked any of the ugly things I have done. But I do them so others don't have to, so that our village can experience peace. Naruto, the more missions we do, the more people we kill help our village and its economy and military get stronger. If we don't do it, then we get weaker, and the weaker we are the more vulnerable we are. That's when another village gets it in their head that they can conquer Konoha, kill men, rape women and enslave children. Naruto, you have chosen a path to be completely selfless. We give up our sense of innocence for the good of our village, to know that little children in this village can play in the street instead of being slaughtered ruthlessly. Ibisu's voice was tight, emotion playing across his golden eyes, the blonde looked grumpy, but he would learn. Remember Naruto, when it comes time for you to take your first life, you cannot mourn it, because you will find that those who you kill will most times have no hesitation in killing you or other people, and they won't feel bad about it. I won't tell you we're not bad people, Naruto, ninja are tools and monsters, we are trained from a young age to kill. We may not like it, but we do it because we are told to. You chose your path when you accepted this, and the only way you can get out of it is by having your name carved into the memorial stone. The man's voice was quiet, almost silent, but yet it seemed to have cut through the noisy air of the restaurant like a sharpened kunai through an enemy nin's skull. Naruto looked up at his mentor and nodded hesitantly. Ibisu pushed his glasses up his nose as they waited for their food. Ibisu-sensei, what else does our job entail? The blonde asked carefully. Ibisu carefully scanned the boy before waving his hand lazily. We will discuss it during our chakra control exercises, he said monotonously. It was good the boy was asking. He had hoped he could avoid this until it was close to the second month, but it seemed he had no time. Naruto needed to know everything or he could be exploited. Dinner was a quiet affair, both teacher and apprentice ate in silence, both thinking over the words that Ibisu had spoken. The future seemed ominous for both, and yet. I feel like even though Naruto will have to end the childish antics he practices, I feel like everything will be okay in the end. Naruto, you will be a true shinobi, smirking slightly. Ibisu finished his sushi and waited as Naruto finished his ribs. Once done, Ibisu and the blonde stood to go, Ibisu pausing only to leave his money on the table. No tip, not the way these people treated his apprentice. Sarutobi sat staring at the reports on his desk, he nodded wearily and looked up to face the Anbu in front of him. And he has shown no anger with the boy. Sarutobi's voice cut through the room and sent a shiver down the Anbu's spine. The voice the dog-masked Anbu thought promised pain of beyond imagination if the boy was being harmed. As far as I can tell, aside from being a bit forceful and perhaps a bit rough, Ibisu is training the boy well. Then again, that could also be because he knows I have been watching him, the Anbu said, watching for his Hokage's reaction. Sarutobi looked down at the file and sighed. Trying to spy on a man who could very well spy on the Hokage of the village was a dangerous and tricky thing to do. Maybe if he had been in his prime he would have proved the better, but as it was, Ibisu was the best there was. Dismiss, the Hokage said wearily, watching idly as the Anbu bowed before disappearing in a puff of smoke. Spinning in his chair to face out the window overlooking the village, he took a puff of his pipe. Your move, Ibisu-kun. 3.5 weeks it had been since he started his training, 3.5 weeks to have politics, seals, architecture, mannerisms, geography, history, pressure points, poison, anatomy, chemistry, physics, and many other skills shoved into his mind. After being crammed in, they were then pounded on until they left a lasting impression from Ibisu's ruthless quizzes. All in all, looking back on it, he was some glad he accepted this apprenticeship. His chakra control had skyrocketed. The first week after accepting the apprenticing, it had taken him 4 days to get down the tree climbing with only his feet, 2 days to do it fully, and then 2 days to do push-ups, squats, handstands, and even battle on trees. It was excruciating, but it had become second nature to the blonde-haired student. When Ibisu taught you something, he taught you all the tricks to it and let you solve out most of them on your own. He never told you something straight out, but allowed room for you to realize yourself the new ways to do a single training technique. It was infuriating, however effective it was, the blonde smiled. The charred remains of training ground 13 had left them without a training ground for a day, as he had blasted the thing with his first 3 homemade explosive tags. Boy had that made a boom. Afterwards he was taken, beat on and beat down, supposedly learning Taijutsu. However, the blonde only remembered the bruises that had taken a full day to heal, even with his fast healing. Afterwards he had been taken to a hot spring with scalding hot water. Needless to say, his doubtlessness originally on not being able to walk on water had been spit on, crumpled up, burned, and then its ashes had been thrown to the winds. He had learned the water walking in less than a day, shakily he had done it. That's all Ibisu wanted, as he had taken Naruto and treated him to ramen that night. Of course, Naruto was not dumb enough to believe he got away that easily. The next morning he was up before the sun, and with Ibisu in a training ground so far out near the outskirts of Konoha, it was a workout just to get there before you actually started to train. Training ground 47 was large, almost 16 miles in diameter. It was a large clearing in the middle, surrounded by major wildlife and vegetation. 3.5 kilometers northeast was a large lake half a mile round, connected to a river that led towards the valley of the end. It was no surprise that that was where Naruto was put through his rigorous training regime on water. Push-ups, squats, rolls, handstands, fighting, dodging, meditating, even studying was done on the water. It took him less time to get the water walking to second nature than it ever did for the tree walking. He could alter flow of his chakra through almost all of his tenketsus with ease. At the blink of an eye he could alter the flow and even it out to the levels needed for whatever space he occupied. Ibisu had then taught Naruto what was called kunai balancing. The kunais rested blade first on the tips of his fingers. He was to use chakra to keep them up and steady. Surprisingly or unsurprisingly, it only took him a day to get down the manipulation of chakra to do the technique. Both Ibisu and Naruto were unsure on that, being that his fingers could have been lopped off or just a natural at manipulating his finger tenketsus. It took him less than a day to be able to hold 10 kunai on all 10 of his fingers. The boy, they decided, was naturally gifted at focusing on his tenketsu in his fingers. Naruto had become adept in his taijutsu style, growing to the style at a rapid rate. Ibisu was almost surprised at the boy's progress, but it fit the child somehow. Naruto was excited to learn that the style was called Hibi style. The goal was to use the least amount of effort to do the most effective damage in battle. Whether it be dodging to a point where the kunai or fist missed you by half an inch, or slipping inside someone's guard and using pressure points or vicious quick strikes to bring the opponent down for good. The boy stretched out unnaturally every day. Ibisu had brushed it off to the child's fast healing, but he didn't mind it at all. Anything to help the boy along on his own power was a benefit. The noisy, bratty Naruto who had played pranks was almost non-existent. In this calm, well-mannered, well-groomed, collected child, the only way one could tell the same was the blue eyes, blonde hair, and the boy's ingenious mind when backed into a corner. He was a practical strategic genius on the fly, planning things out. He had gotten exceptionally better, and his patience was higher as well. It took Naruto 3 days to realize that being loud and anxious got people killed, that in an electric seal on his back that he couldn't remove, that would zap him every time his voice raised a certain level, as well as whenever Ibisu wanted it to. Chakra suppression had been the first thing that Ibisu had began to teach Naruto during the middle of the second week of training. He had unfortunately heavy trouble with it at first, before Naruto had found a loophole. The reason he had such a problem was due to his high reserves. He could not make his chakra signature seem anything less than a high-level Chunin. However, he had managed to think of the feeling of exhaustion and trick himself into believing he was out of chakra. After that he had picked up the ability quite easily and had an unnatural flair for it. If it weren't for the fact that the boy didn't have the guts to do it, he would have snuck up on Ibisu millions of times. It was scary to think that the child had such ability. Ibisu had merely sighed and said, "And Kami-sama, he's no longer a prankster." Today, however, the blonde was sighing in relief as he noticed the gloved fist pass by his face. Sending a pulse of chakra towards his feet, he smiled in success as he was sent flying backwards. Reapplying the correct amount of chakra, he grimaced as he landed on top of the lake surface. Feeling the digging of blades in his finger, he quickly refocused his chakra towards the kunai blades on his fingers. Looking up ahead, he sighed as he noticed the blood slowly drip down his fingers and slip into the water of the lake below him. "Close, Naruto, you'll have to be quicker and far more cleverer to overcome me, child." Ibisu's voice called from across the lake. The black-garbed man was watching Naruto. Standing straight up lazily, he watched the boy. "I suppose I'll be coming towards you then," he stated, his voice more saying rather than asking. He knew it was a rhetorical question. The boy would not charge in on him anymore these days. He wasn't sure if he was disappointed or proud of that fact. Disappointed because he could no longer beat the boy bloody, or proud due to the fact the blonde brat had picked up his lessons quickly. Moving forward, he lazily pushed his glasses up his nose as he focused for a moment. Bringing his hand down, he began to quicken his pace into a full-speed run. He noticed the boy tense and smiled as Ibisu suddenly veered off to the left, leaving the blonde boy in wonder, which turned immediately to fear as he felt the cold blade of a kunai touch against his throat. You let yourself be caught by an enemy ninja. If you were on my team, you'd be dead. Ibisu said, his voice hard as steel as he glared down at the boy. Haven't learned anything at all, Ibisu thought to himself, shaking his head. He let the boy run over what had happened. Flashback jutsu. Ibisu focused, frowning a bit before he noticed his clone form at the bottom of the lake. A simple Kawaramiri swapped places, and he was quickly running along the bottom of the lake under the boy. He watched as his clone veer off before sending a large flow of chakra towards his feet, popping up through the water like a cork. He slowed his chakra before rising out of the water slowly. Bringing his kunai up and holding it to the boy's throat, he grimaced. He shouldn't have caught the boy off guard this easily. His training needed to be upped. Then flashback jutsu. He watched as the boy's hand holding the kunai wavered slightly, almost like he was planning his next move. It didn't matter, the boy wouldn't be able to get out of this without a large wound. Ibisu frowned, however, as he noticed a bright smile make its way across his student's face. The boy moved forward past his kunai with seemingly no worry about the metal blade holding his death. His frown intensified as he noticed the kunai seemingly go through his student with no force whatsoever. Turning back, he focused his senses before looking towards the shoreline. There his blonde-haired student sitting lotus-style, one palm face up with 5 kunai on his fingers, standing up towards the sky, hovering over the lake surface with a white seal, sparking electricity on the palm of his hand. The boy was smirking at him coldly. Care to ask which seal I made this time, sensei? The boy said with a dark smirk. Ibisu frowned at the boy before breaking out into a large proud grin. The child was passing beyond all his expectations. Walking towards the boy and holstering his kunai, he nodded. Very good, Naruto-kun, you're progressing faster than either I or even Hokage-sama could have imagined. Ibisu smiled as the boy stood up, dusting his black pants off, his other hand still face up with kunais balanced along his fingers. Good, the boy wouldn't stop training until he was dismissed. He was learning his orders as well. Thank you, Ibisu-sensei. Without your help I would still be a weak and foolish child. Naruto's voice had changed, or not so much changed. But the boy chose his words more carefully than before, spoke quieter and with a more mature edge. Ibisu nodded to him, and the boy pulled down each kunai separately before reholstering them along the holsters on his right and left leg. The habit he had begun when he was trained to be able to be ambidextrous. Being left-handed, he needed to learn how to play an impersonation right-handed and left-handed as well. Ibisu looked at the boy carefully before nodding, seemingly deciding something. Very well, dismissed. Take the rest of the day off. Tomorrow I shall quiz you on your studies. Be prepared. Ibisu looked as the boy smiled, bowing to his sensei before turning and walking back towards town. Ibisu watched as the boy seemingly walked off. Now Hokage-sama, we will see my student stand up to your test. We will watch as he surpasses even my thoughts for the evaluation. Anger, ignorance, hate, pain, sorrow, these stares followed him wherever he had traveled through his village. Naruto was no fool. He knew this people despised him, but recently a new emotion had filled these people's eyes. It was there and he acknowledged it. It brought him less problems after all. Fear. They had been staring at him for 2 weeks now like that. It was near the end of his 3rd month of training, and the villagers had finally realized he was being trained. They were annoyed if anything, but an incident 2 weeks ago had put fear in the hearts of all of them. Flashback no jutsu. Naruto walked calmly through the dark marketplace. The sun was going down, and most were headed home for the night. He carried his groceries in his one arm, unconcerned about the crowds, reading his book calmly and navigating through the large crowds with an ease and grace that came unusual to one so young. The boy felt a tug on his mind and he sighed. There was the 3rd attempt of a genjutsu on him in the last 10 minutes. Focusing his chakra, he stopped his chakra circulation for a split second. Smirking, he felt the genjutsu fade. He chuckled as he swore he could hear the Chunin growl from here. The man was a few hundred meters behind him along one of the rooftops, smelling of pine and mild sake. He was most likely looking to take some aggression out on the village pariah. Carefully noting the difference in the trigger explosion seal and the normal trigger alarm seal. Hearing the sounds of laughter, he looked up further ahead to see 3 men stumbling around, the smell of sake creaking from them heavy enough for him to smell them from this distance. His eye twitched before he turned down an alley, hoping to avoid any trouble. His hope, however, was cut short as he heard the large drunken laugh of, "Hey boys. There's the demon brat. Let's get him." Sighing in annoyance, he noticed the Chunin's presence approach rapidly, landing nearby, most likely to plan a beating with his 3 new allies. Moving down the alley, he laid his groceries in a darkened doorway before making clone. He looked towards the clone and dissipated it. He made another clone, this time holding a brown bag of groceries. Moving into the darkened doorway, he slipped into the shadows and lowered his chakra output. Watching carefully, he idly noted how quickly 2 of the thugs managed to get around to the other side of the alley and was walking up it. 2 thugs on the exit of the alley, 1 thug and a Chunin on the entrance of the alley, completely cornered and trapped. perfect odds against him, but the odds were what he was trained for. Watching carefully as the Chunin passed him by without so much of a second glance, the man wasn't that good or the sake was affecting him more than Naruto had originally thought. Carefully stalking up behind the two, he made sure the bigger drunk to the left of the Chunin concealed his body. He watched as the four surrounded the cowering clone. He watched annoyed as the men laughed and bragged about beating down the demon brat. He prepared and watched as the thug on the other side shot his foot out to kick the clone. However, having a person's foot slip through an illusion is generally enough to set somebody off balanced. The thug and three others looked gobsmacked at the illusion. Leaping up, Naruto slammed his fist into the back of the fat drunk's neck, his fist having his index knuckle sticking out, allowing it to strike the pressure point, dropping the man into an unconscious heap in the stone floor. Twisting himself in mid-air, he spun around and snapped a vicious snap kick to the Chunin's surprised jaw. Landing in a roll, he sprung forward and leaping up, he threw a leg out and kicked sideways. He felt his foot connect with the thug's still extended leg and heard with a vile satisfaction when the bone shifted out of place and began sprouting out of the man's leg. The snapping sound followed immediately after, along with the sounds of a man screaming and landing on the ground in a heap. The thug to the man's left, realizing his immediate danger, threw a sloppy punch with a frightened expression. The blonde shifted slightly, allowing the large fist to pass by his head, skimming his hair as the man began to go off balance. Snapping his fist, Naruto felt his fist connect with the man's throat. The man, surprised, pulled back, gagging and breathing in sharply, his hands moving towards his throat. Before a crunching and most excruciating pain sent through him, his hands moved down to his crushed genitals. He mildly noted that the boy had more power than a normal 10-year-old should. That was of course before he was intimately introduced into the cold cement and then blissful unconsciousness. Whipping around, Naruto faced the now standing Chunin, his eyes raked over the man, taking in the deadly-looking kunai and the mad gleam in the nin's eyes. Looking behind him towards the open alley, he quickly considered fleeing. "No, you don't, demon. Your end is now." The man quickly ran towards the blonde, putting his attention back on the charging Chunin. He tensed his muscles, ready to move at a second's notice. The man lunged at the demon with a large grin on his face, the mad gleam in his eyes full force. It was with morbid fascination he watched as the boy seemed to twitch, as the kunai missed him by an inch. He watched as the boy struck a nerve in his arm. The Chunin dropped the kunai as he lost the feeling of his arm. He watched as the boy's hand shot up, hand open, and jabbed him in the throat. Stumbling back, the Chunin raised his hand to his throat stupidly. Looking down at his hand, he watched blearily as his red-stained hand looked up at him. Gurgling, he looked up towards the demon as he felt his head get lighter. Dropping to his knees, he tried to speak once again, a mere gurgle coming out again. "DDD demon," the man whispered before he fell forward, laying upon the cold concrete, the life in his emerald eyes, leaving them slowly. The blonde's eyes widened, watching the dying man, his thoughts moving rapidly before he took a deep breath. Calming himself, he looked around. It was a mess, that was sure. Tori, Yuma, Katen. Furia no Jutsu. Spitting a small ball of fire upwards into the air, he watched slowly as it rose high into the Konoha night sky. He closed his eyes as he counted to 10 and sighed as the small ball of fire exploded into a large nova, sending a bright light through the sky. Sensing the approaching chakra signatures, he turned and faced the dead Chunin's body and watched as 3 Anbu dropped from the rooftop. The Anbu in the middle stepped forward wearing a cat mask. Nodding to the blonde boy, he scouted the scene quickly. This was going to be a mess to clean up. "You two, clean up the scene, bring the men to Ibiki and he Chunin's body to the morgue. Uzumaki-san, come with me, I'm sure Hokage-sama will wish to speak with you." The Anbu watched cautiously as the blonde nodded before stepping forward, allowing the Anbu to place his hand on him, and mildly noted as they disappeared in a puff of smoke. He focused on the feeling of extreme sense of speed and weight pushing down on him. As the Shunsen came to a stop, he noticed it stopped. The Hokage breathed in the strong smoke from his pipe and sighed tiredly as a burning went down his throat. His eyes roamed over the scroll detailing the report of the incident and the follow-up interrogation and autopsy. It was fairly clear-cut after Ibiki had 10 minutes with the 3 drunken men. Flicking his eyes over the scroll, he studied the boy sitting across from him. The blonde completely calm, his eyes almost bored, just like his sensei. The boy knew it was a simple matter of defense, the only problems being the specific boy in question, along with the combined village's hate and now fear of him. It had been 2 days since the incident before his report was fully compiled, and the sense of fear of the boy had shot through the village quicker than a fire burning through the forest of Konoha. "It is, as you said, a clear case of self-defense, Ibisu-kun. You and your student are free to go. However, due to this incident, I'm going to push the deadline of your student's evaluation. You will have an extra 2 months to prepare your student for B and A rank missions. I want Naruto out of the village, true, so that all of this can blow over, however I want him prepared. I have already picked your evaluator, and in which case in 2 months I will call Naruto in here. His evaluation will be based off an evaluation, his mission will be given to him at that date." "Understood." "Hi, Hokage-sama," both student and teacher echoed. Staring at both of them a moment he nodded before waving his hand. Dismissed. And Naruto-kun, take care. Hi, Sarutobi-sama, the blonde replied, bowing slightly and moving towards the door with his sensei. Then flashback jutsu. The fear in the villager's eyes had continued throughout his daily activities in the village. The extra 2 months of training had been brutal. The training regime had been worse than his first 2 months. Naruto had increased his ability in repressing his chakra, learned more about seals and their creation, demolitions, sabotage. He had learned how to disguise himself without a henge. He was also learned a few minor genjutsus, as well as 3 ninjutsu. Kurigakure no jutsu, a great technique for infiltration along with assassination. Causing a large field of mist to move into the surrounding area without leaving too much of a trace to be assumed an aggressive technique. Only an extremely good nin or a nin with high levels of experience would notice the technique and think otherwise about it. Izubushin no jutsu, when combined with the Kurigakure jutsu, it was an amazing technique put towards assassination and distractions. Naruto had picked up the technique like breathing air. Once encompassed within the mist, Abisu's blonde student had practically unlimited options for his tricks or plans of action. Shunsen no jutsu, at first the blonde had horrible trouble with this technique, however, after an extremely different version than what Abisu had showed the boy, he had picked it up. The boy had managed to mark areas that he had been to with a flow of chakra. Depending on how much chakra he marked with allowed him a different area on where he could move to that space from. After the first day he had sent hundreds of shadow clones out to disperse themselves, allowing all their chakra to mark areas around Konoha. He had been bedridden for 3 days, allowing his chakra to replenish. He was extremely happy to learn that it had not been a waste, and he was able to teleport from his and Abisu's training ground all the way to the market sector of Konoha. Abisu was highly impressed, as the variation reminded him heavily of what made the yondaime known as the Yellow Flash. The blonde-haired boy looked around the street, watching in mild irritation of villagers quickly leaping out of the way of him. Everyone was fearful of him now, and those that weren't were the ninja showing the boy more respect than before. He smiled bitterly. It was ironic to him, in order to get acknowledgement from these people, he had to act like what they thought of him, a demon. He had to kill in order to get his acknowledgement. Brushing it off, he continued move towards the nearest building before leaping up, springing off the wall, and landing onto the roof. He sprinted across the rooftops, leaping from building to building, moving rapidly towards the Hokage's tower. He had a mission to begin. Naruto-kun, come in, come in. Sarutobi's voice echoed throughout the twin oak doors. Opening the door enough to slip in, he ignored the irritating secretary mumble about demons and slipped through the doors, nodding mildly to the 2 Anbu on duty guarding the doors. Stepping inside, he moved fluently to the middle of the room. Hearing the close of the door behind him, he moved to the middle of the room before bowing before his leader. Okage-sama, he said blandly. He had learned to keep emotions from his face, from his mind, and from his voice. When it came to battle, he was emotionless. He was the perfect army. The aged leader was slightly concerned about this, but he paid it no mind. The boy's was the exact opposite when he was in the village or not in battle, cheerful, energetic, chipper, everything he was not during battle. It has come to the end of your 4 months of apprenticeship. If you fail to pass your next mission, you have failed not only the village, but your sensei as well. He has trained you the way he saw fit to prepare you for this evaluation. If you fail, it was because you chose not to take the training to heart. Do you understand? The leader's voice was crisp and clear. Straight to the point and yet edged. This was the Sandaime Hokage, not his surrogate grandfather. Hi, Hokage-sama. I understand, I am prepared for this evaluation. To make my village, my sensei, and myself proud. Naruto's voice was confident and clear. The Hokage smiled. This was how he had imagined Naruto, a strong ninja. Very well, your mission will be a Black Ops mission. Meaning that after you accept, I will deny any and all knowledge of this mission. If you are caught, I will have you listed as a missing nin by yesterday. I already have the paperwork to have such a thing done. Do you understand? The Hokage's eyes stared at the boy calmly. He hoped the boy would get through, because if he did not, the mission would prove disaster. Hi Hokage-sama, I accept this mission. Naruto bowed and then stood up, moving forward and accepting the scroll handed to him by the Hokage. Is this also about why the secretary does not have any records of my being here? The blonde's voice curious. Hi, it is, Naruto-kun. You will not be traced back to me since our last meeting. You may open the scroll if you truly wish to accept this mission. The elder man eyed the boy warily, looking for any sign of doubt in the boy. He watched in fascination, as the boy didn't even flinch as he whipped blood across the seal of the scroll and opened it. After opening it fully, he watched as the boy scanned the page. Idly he noted, and was highly impressed that any shock the boy may have, he showed not a bit of it. Naruto's blue eyes scanned over the scroll in some amount of surprise. He knew his mission would be difficult, but this. Shinobi-san, by direct authority of the Hokage, you will undergo a Black Ops infiltration mission. Your target is Konohagakure. This will not only be a test of your own skills, but those of the defenses of the village. Your direct mission is to infiltrate Sunagakure undetected, enough so that you may execute a surgical practice strike along points in Konoha to allow an enemy invading force easy access to Konoha to destroy it. Your secondary missions are to subdue and/or distract high-profile targets in the village. High-profile targets include the Hokage, any Anbu or Jounin, council members, high-profile clans, even high-celebrity civilians will be allowed. You will be allowed to carry this out in any way you see fit, as long as it does not lead to any real destruction or hampering of any day-to-day activities of Konoha shinobi or civilians after the training simulation is over. Your time limit: 1.5 weeks. You will begin your mission ASAP. As of this moment you have 1 day before you will be listed as a C-class missing nin. Destroy this if you understand your mission. Naruto blinked at the scroll, reread the key details before channeling some chakra into his hands, watching idly as the scroll burned away in his hand into ashes. Looking towards the Hokage he bowed before turning and leaving. Sarutobi watched the boy leave, picking up his pipe before lighting it he breathed in the smoke. Spinning around in his chair to watch his village he sighed. Good luck, Naruto-kun. I fear you're going to need it. Taking another puff of his pipe he turned around. Now for your main evaluator. Pressing a button on his desk he spoke to the small speaker under one of his papers. Hime-san, please send a request for Ibiki-san for a mission briefing tomorrow afternoon at this time. He sighed as he heard his secretary acknowledge his statement. Perhaps sending out Marino Ibiki after Naruto was a much more difficult mission than thought. The Hokage watched as the normally unshakable man looked up in shock. He faced his leader in high surprise. Is this? The man's voice quivered. Hi, Ibiki-kun. Uzumaki Naruto is a missing nin as of today. He is in cohesion with Iwa and is to be captured and interrogated upon sight. If resisting, he is to be put down. We have received a rumor from Ibisu's spy that it is possible they want the boy infiltrate Konoha. After the training he has received from Ibisu I fear that he may actually have a chance at this. Your mission Ibiki is to increase and tighten all security. If you can, take down Uzumaki Naruto if he comes into the village. The Hokage was quite amazed by himself. He had become amazing in his experience as a ninja. Not even a hint of guilt or even a thought that he could be lying. As far as anybody was concerned, Uzumaki Naruto was a traitor against Konoha. He had already had a heated discussion with Ibisu earlier. The man was not to get involved with his traitorous student, or at least, what he thought was a traitorous student. Hi, Hokage-sama. I will not fail. Marino Ibiki stood up and bowed before turning around and moving towards the doors. He vowed to his Hokage and to a close friend that he would catch that boy. And he would make him pay for going against his own village. Then again, if anybody deserves to betray this village, it's that boy. Ibiki brushed that thought away. It was time to commence his mission. Iruka looked up bleary-eyed, rubbing his eyes he sighed irritatingly. Shaking his head he stood up, stumbling across the floor. He cursed loudly as he banged his shin off his table. Growling he stomped into the bathroom, smacking at the wall until he grinned in satisfaction at the light shining into the large bathroom. Moving towards the sink he turned the tap on before sliding his hands under the faucet, splashing the water into his face. He sighed in contentment. Looking up into the mirror he pulled his eyelid down, staring at his bloodshot eyes with some annoyance. Carefully putting his finger towards his black iris, he gently put a small amount of pressure on it before pulling it to the side, revealing a sliding black iris atop a small lens. His blue eyes shined behind the contact and he smiled, sliding the lens back in place. He blinked a few times before stepping into the shower. 15 minutes later, like his daily routine, Iruka was dressed and eating a hearty breakfast: eggs, bacon, an apple, and a glass of milk. Sighing at the long day ahead of him he stood and moved towards the desk beside his door. Grabbing the 4 scrolls off the desk he picked them up and slid them into his small backpack that sat alongside the wall. Looking down he faced the large stack of posters. He chuckled. This tournament for the genin will really be a good show for the clans. Iruka smiled as his voice came out flawless. He smiled. A small test to see how well the students were learning was just so helpful to his cause, and boy would it be a great show. I'll have to thank Iruka-san for leaving his notes on his students and his class planner for the next month on the kitchen table. Haha, it came too easily to defeat him. Naruto in Iruka's form smirked as he thought back to his kidnapping of Iruka. Flashback no jutsu. Iruka-sensei, I'm glad you could make it. So you got my note. The orange-garbed blonde-headed boy cheered. Stepping back he let Iruka step into his somewhat messy apartment. Hi Naruto-kun, and remember I'm not your sensei anymore. That's part of the reason I came here, Naruto. Along with your note I came to ask why you dropped out of the academy. The blonde boy dimmed slightly at that announcement. Turning around he moved to the kitchen. He sighed as he poured 2 glasses of tea. Moving towards the table in the middle of the kitchen he sat down while placing another glass in front of him. Taking a sip of his own tea he frowned at the somewhat sweet tea. Sapphire blue eyes watched a brown-haired Chunin slip across the apartment gracefully. Eyeing the man's movements he smiled inwardly. The elder man sat across from Naruto while picking up a teacup. Taking a sip he noticed the sweat taste as well. Naruto. What type of tea is this? Haruka eyed the boy warily. The boy looked nervously up at the cupboard. I'm not quite sure. To be honest, I don't even remember buying tea. So it's probably been here for a while. I thought it was good. Why, is there something wrong with yours, Haruka-sensei? Naruto asked with a small frown, his eyes squinty as he looked at the man's teacup. The man took another sip before he made a face, placing the cup down onto the table. Nah, don't worry about it, Naruto-kun. But as for why I'm here. Haruka blinked, shaking his head slightly. Looking up at the boy, he frowned and whipped his eyes. Shaking his head, he looked up once again, only seeing a heavily blurred figure. And then, Naruto, what's in this tea? The brown-haired man asked wearily, whipping at his eyes trying to keep them open. He looked up at the fuzzy image of the orange-dressed boy. Why, heavy sedative, of course. I can't have you struggling while I smuggle you out of the village, can I, Haruka-sensei? Haruka gaped at the blonde-haired boy before struggling towards a kunai. Don't be silly, Haruka-sensei. You were hit with a genjutsu the moment you had your first sip. I removed your kunai holder ages ago, and you should be unconscious right about. The blonde-haired boy stopped talking as a loud thump sounded behind him. Turning around, he looked down at the unconscious Haruka. Your brotherly feelings for me are too easy to exploit, Haruka-sensei. But I have to thank you for an easy into the village. The blonde turned around and dropped the hinge, growing almost a foot and a few pounds of muscle, his shoulders broader, and the orange bled away into a full black outfit. He tossed Haruka's kunai pouch onto the counter and reached into his back pouch, pulling out a small tablet. He placed it under his tongue and let it dissolve before swallowing. He sighed as he felt his own drowsiness ebb away. You could never be too careful, that's why Naruto had put the sedative in both teas. It's gonna be a long way to lug his heavy ass to Kapante village. Then flashback no jutsu. Haruka's eyes scanned the apartment, making sure he had everything before pulling his keys out of his pocket. Moving out of the door, he shut it behind him before locking it. Naruto, and keep in mind he is in disguise as Haruka. I will now refer to him as Naruto. Turned and began walking towards the academy. It was Sunday, and he had no classes today, but he had convinced the other teachers that a tournament among the academy classes would be a good way to get popularity among clans and show their child's progress amongst the academy. Noticing the streets getting busier at the morning rush, he leaped up off a tent stand and bounced right up onto a nearby rooftop. Moving across them, he began to run his idea of the proposition through his head. Moving towards the clan sector, Naruto smiled evilly as he began to set his plan into motion. Ibiki was having a bad day. 3 Chunins had not shown up for shift on time. Quickly investigating with a squad of Anbu, Ibiki was quite unhappy to find 2 of them hungover and sick at their apartment, while the other he was extremely angry at, for the man had merely slept in. His investigation so far had led him up to almost no leads. The only problem was nobody along the gate had reported any unusual activity, and nobody had seen the blonde-haired boy for days, and he had certainly not went outside the village, as Izumo and Katetsu, who had gate duty for the past week and a half, had not seen the child. However, their testimonies themselves required some amount of skepticism, as both of them had been known to have a liking to the boy, as well as having helped the child find some hiding places he had known about to stay away from particularly upset villagers. The head interrogator was, needless to say, quite unhappy as he sat drinking his cup of tea, staring across to the purple-haired woman beside him. He growled irritably. She looked at him and quirked an eyebrow. Oh? Is Ibiki-kun frustrated? My, what girl grabbed your attention that's able to twist you around more so than even I, the great Anko? Sexiest and deadliest kunoichi in all of Konoha can. I must find their names so I can learn. This served merely to make the generally all-around unflustered man more irritated. He looked at the woman as he set his teacup down, his face losing all emotion. Anko picked up the sudden change before becoming serious herself. You are the only one I can come to about this, Anko. I'll be honest, when I'm completely lost trying to find my target. The person is loud, rambunctious, well known to be a troublemaker, and one of the worst students of ninja arts in history, but yet he is able to hide from me in the very village I'm supposed to protect. His eyes cutting seriously into the woman's eyes. She merely smiled and lazily ate a piece of dango off the large stick. I'm sure you're just not looking in the right spots, Ibiki-kun. He's probably. She was cut off form, continuing however, when Ibiki looked around for a moment before shaking his head, he laid money down upon the table and motioned for her to follow. Frowning, she did so while grabbing another stick of dango to go. Once outside in the busy street, they quickly leaped up upon the rooftop of the well-known dango and tea establishment. Odd combination, they originally thought when coming here, but they didn't question the conveyance 4 years back at the beginning of their friendship. Noting absently the Chunin teacher from the academy putting up posters along the nearby walls, he chuckled inwardly. An academy tournament, some plaything for more wannabe shinobi to think they're something. Turning back to Anko, he faced her in dead seriousness. He sighed before rubbing his eyes. The target is Uzumaki Naruto, he said as he watched her carefully. He watched her twitch and her face screwed up in concentration before it switched to one of understanding. Ah, the Kyuubi kid, I still don't see why she was cut off again however, as Ibiki held up a hand. Looking out across the village he sighed before turning back to his purple-haired sadistic friend. And the only student of Ibisu he watched her expression of confusion change to gobsmacked. Fuck simple, crude, and effective. For that one word described the one situation that he never ever wished to be in. Ibisu was well known throughout Konoha Elite for not only his brutal and effective methods, not his ability to create a spy network so great that Jiraiya-sama himself couldn't penetrate it, not even for his ability to sneak into almost any hidden village undetected. No, Ibisu was well known in Konoha for his more than questionable methods of sacrificing team members to complete a mission, as well as even coming to a standstill with Sharingan Kakashi. It was a well-known fact that Ibisu was no nonsense and brutal in even his own training. For him to have a student, let alone a successful student, was a god-forsaken nightmare, considering of course that the student he took went rogue and was working for Iwa and attempting to sabotage the village security. She eyed him a moment before looking around. "I'll help you, Ibiki-kun, this is gonna be tough. And besides, I wish to taste the blood of Ibisu's young student," Anko said with a sadistic smile. A kunai made its way towards her face as she licked its blade, pulling it away from her face she smiled evilly. Ibiki held back a shudder, truly if he wasn't a traitor, he would pity the boy. But in this case, exceptions could be made. Naruto smiled and waved to Mizuki as he passed by the man. Applying chakra to the base he rolled another poster about the upcoming tournament along the wall. Standing back he looked at the poster and smiled. He would pat himself on the back for a job well done if he could. He had listened to part of the two Jounins' conversation on the rooftop of the Dango shop only hours ago, and he had been slightly panicked. If it wasn't for the training on how to heighten his hearing, he never would have been able to get the info that he needed. He was glad he had read the bingo books and knew that the two Jounin were Miratashi Anko and Marino Ibiki, both well-renowned inside the Fire Country borders. Anko is a sadistic Takebetsu Jounin as well as an assassin, while Ibiki was known as a brutal and effective interrogator. There was a rumor that Marino Ibiki could get inside your head faster than you could strap on your sandals. Knowing that these two people along with others most likely Anbu were going to be hunting him down made him smile even more when he had walked by the two with no problems whatsoever. His amusement would grow in the coming weeks as he already had his plan on high-ranking members of society as well. Already he had his original mission done, so long as everything went to plan he smiled. If everything went to plan this mission would be easier than he had originally thought. Thinking about that he growled somewhat at the obvious lack of security in the village though. Peace sure had brought them to a comfort zone, at least the tournament would defiantly wake these people up. Looking up at the sky at the setting sun he frowned. It had taken him a lot longer than he had planned to get all the posters up, but then again he had well over 150 of the posters made, and he did have to make sure they were well posted in the village. Moving off back towards his apartment, he was concerned when he felt two chakra signatures inside his apartment. Sniffing carefully he frowned, snakes and blood. He already had a feeling who the two intruders were, but what were they there for, he wondered. Have they already figured me out? Jesus, this mission is gonna be over so fast. Enough. Calm down, think reasonably, you have given them no reason to suspect you. Iruka was taken care of easily, and you better than anybody know how to act him. That's it. They're probably here to ask if I had talked to me recently. Okay, that just sounded odd, but Iruka was well known for trying to help me whenever other teachers wouldn't. Okay, just don't panic, but remember your backup plan just in case. Not even stopping his pace he continued up the stairs to his apartment door. Fumbling with the keys for a moment he unlocked the door before moving inside and drawing a kunai. Facing the two trespassers he frowned before sighing in relief, sliding the kunai back into its holster. He looked at the two oddly. Morino-san, Miratashi-san. I apologize, I thought you were a burglar, or perhaps something more, Naruto said as his posture relaxed. Moving towards the kitchen he placed his backpack down beside the table by the door. Watching the two eyeing him idly he frowned. May I ask what it is brings you to breaking and entering my home at 8:30 in the evening? We are investigating a recent criminal, and we have knowledge that he has ties connected with Yumi no Iruka. Uzumaki Naruto as of yesterday evening has been classified a top priority C-class missing nin. Ibiki spoke calmly, carefully watching the man in front of him for any sign of out-of-character actions. The man gasped. Naruto-kun. How? Why what but he hasn't even graduated the academy, he dropped out of the place. How can he be a missing nin let alone a high-class one when he has little to no training? Naruto gasped with a mixture of shock and disbelief. He frowned near the end of his little gig. Ibiki stared at the man carefully. Apparently the man had a large attachment to the boy. However, it seemed to be one-sided if Iruka did not know of the boy's apprenticeship to Ibisu. Though he dropped out, Uzumaki was made a Takebetsu genin as of accepting the contract to become apprentice to a senior rank jounin. He was declared a C-rank missing nin as of discovery of high crimes against Konoha. He has been discovered keeping tabs on high-ranked individuals in Konoha and assisting Iwanins in a possible invasion scenario form inside the village. We are tasked with finding him. He is to be brought before the council and then executed before he can cause any more damage to the village or village security. Do you know where he is or where he could possibly be hiding? Ibiki spoke clearly and collectedly. He wanted to get out of here quickly. Shifting his eyes at Iruka's movements, he noticed an odd black ink mixed with the man's skin, a tattoo. His health charts never mentioned a tattoo, and the one on him looked like it had been there for years. His last checkup was 2 months ago. Frowning, he was about to speak up when suddenly the building lurched and all 3 members looked out the window to a large pillar of smoke rising from across the village. Iruka moved to the window quickly and gasped. That's Naruto's apartment. He opened the window before leaping out and onto the nearby rooftop, the 2 Jounins quickly following behind him. It had been 6 days since that close call, and Naruto had been thrilled that the destruction of his apartment had been distraction enough to pull Ibiki away from questioning him further. The tournament would be held on Monday, and his plan would be pushed into action. If he was lucky, he would push it further ahead and get the mission completed sooner. Looking down his nose to examine the seal he had drawn, he smiled as he realized it was damn near perfect, textbook almost, except the variation trigger with his favorite seal following it up. Naruto had went to class as Iruka like usual, and to his amazement played the man amazingly well. Whether or not it was because of his training and learning how to impersonate people, or just how well he knew Iruka, he wasn't quite sure. But children were bored during his history lectures, awake during sparring and accuracy training, and excited when he had brought up the academy tournament. Needless to say, going along with the job, he also had to correct homework assignments. He would impale somebody with a kunai up the ass. If he had to read one more, I think the most powerful technique that ninja can learn is stealth and ninjutsu. Answer: didn't any of these children know that those 2 things were so obviously different? He had been even angrier at their survival test on Monday. He had brought them into the nearby woods like planned and brought them to the middle of the field. He then ordered them to leave it without getting caught. Needless to say, a class of 20 or so individuals, and not one of them thought it would be a good idea to either work as a team or use somebody else's leverage. If it had been him, he would have worked with somebody until the moment he got near the instructor. He would have then injured his partner to make him slower and the one to get caught while he made a getaway to finish the mission. His frustration, however, dimmed highly when he had started drawing. He had seen sketch pads in Iruka's place, but all of them were blank, so trying his hand at it, he seemed to just flow with the images. When he laid his pencil to the paper, the images in his mind just flowed right out of him and onto the page. What he thought he was doing for only 20 minutes took up 2.5 hours. The result was surprisingly accurate and stunning picture of Ibisu and himself eating at the barbecue restaurant from what he could only assume would be a third person's perspective. However, the main difference was Ibisu had a wild smile on his face. Needless to say, it was odd to see Ibisu with a smile on his face, let alone the fact that the man's glasses were down his nose and his golden eyes shone over them. He was always curious about the man's eyes, as Ibisu's profile had said he had black eyes. He had reminded himself to ask the man that, but unfortunately he had been delayed by his test. Surprisingly, it had been extremely quiet since the 6 days ago where Anko and Ibiki had questioned him, and now that he thought more about it, it had been a bit odder than he would have liked. Wait, he had seen Anko around town before, and Ibisu had told him she was loud and sadistic, but yet during their interview, she had barely said a word. She had merely looked around the room, uninterested for that matter. Wait, looking around the room carefully, he scanned to see if he noticed anything out of place. That's when he saw it. The bathroom mirror was open slightly. Shit. I hadn't noticed before because I wasn't at the proper angle, but it's open, damn it. That's where my contact solution and hair dye was. Shit, they know I got to move. Thinking quickly, he pulled out a kunai and slapped a wad of homemade explosive notes to the kunai's handle. Opening the window and looking around, he did a quick sweep for chakra signatures before opening it and leaping out and landing upon the rooftop on the building across the street, the moonlight beating down on the gravel as he stood up to look back. His eyes widened as he viciously suppressed his chakra, cutting it down to as low as he could before he crouched behind a pillar half used for clothesline. Pulling out a small mirror, he lowered it to the bottom of the wall before sliding it part of the way out and watched as 4 black figures craped across the apartment rooftop of Iruka's home. He watched carefully and witnessed as suddenly all the lights in the apartment went out and the 4 black figures on the roof moved into the home. Standing up, he put his mirror back in his utility pouch and began to move, that is until he heard a small tune being whistled. Turning around, tensed and ready to attack, his eyes faced Anko and Ibiki standing watching him calmly, Anko whistling while grinning sadistically. He growled as he stared at them. "You're good, Naruto, but not good enough. Your distraction of the destruction of your property distracted me, but you as well. The Anko you saw was merely a clone, while the original snuck in and snooped around after we moved to the remains of the apartment, as well as you didn't use makeup to hide that tattoo of yours." Ibiki spoke calmly as his eyes had a hardened glint to them. He motioned towards Naruto's left collarbone. Carefully observing his surroundings, he realized that these two were the only ones nearby. Grinning evilly, he stared at the two before leaping back a few feet to the ledge of the rooftop. They moved forward, but stopped at his lack of movement after that. Very good, Ibiki-kun, however, you saw my homemade explosive notes at my apartment, that was 2, I have 6 currently attached to this kunai, and even though you two could dodge. I'm fairly certain there are plenty of innocent civilians down here if you're not careful. Naruto spoke carefully, his tone revealing nothing of his intentions. Anko snorted as she stared at the Iruka imposter in front of her. She made one hand seal and watched as the clothing he wore seemed to melt away like a rapidly heating popsicle. His clothing dropped to a black Chunin type vest with many pockets, as well as black cargo pants, 2 kunai pouches on his legs with 2 utility pouches on the sides of his belt. It was finished off with black army boots and a black bandana type high-tate made of dark metal. She growled when she saw it was without the scratch most missing nins carried. Like a punk, like you would be willing to kill so many people for such a small goal. You will be shown leniency if you surrender, if not I get to kill you, Anko said with a growl before quickly cheering up at the thought of tasting the blood of this boy. This time the boy chuckled and stared at the two like they were green genin. Yes, like the council will show me leniency. Let alone the fact you think I don't have what it takes to kill these people. People who have thrown stones, insults, bricks, and as well as beat me and starved me, right, I have no drive to wish to kill these ungrateful bastards at all. Naruto said sarcastically, his eyes quickly shifted around as he noticed the 4 black-garbed figures from earlier leap from the apartment and onto the rooftop behind Ibiki and Anko. He watched Ibiki's movements and noticed the orders. Immobilize him immediately, Tech Taisho, I wouldn't move you 4 if I were you. You may be quick, and your jutsu or even a special ability could be fast, but by the time it takes for you to make it to me, I would see you move, and I would set this kunai off. I may end up dying in the process, but it doesn't mean my partner can't finish the job. Naruto barked out as he noticed the Anbu ready to move. They had stopped, and Ibiki was fairly surprised at first at Naruto's ability to read their sign language. It seems the boy had learned a lot from Ibisu as a student. A shame, he could have been very good if he had remained loyal to Konoha. However, he did frown when he heard the last part of what the boy had to say. A partner could it have been that it wasn't only Apprentice who had turned on Konoha. Ibisu's loyalty was always questionable at best. Being gone for so long in hostile territory so many times was bound to make anybody slip in their mentality. They'd need to find out about the boy's partner, looks like a round of interrogation for him. Anko. Ibiki barked, she nodded not even saying anything, and suddenly Naruto felt fear strike his heart. Images flashed through his mind of multitudes of different people killing him in different ways, Ibisu stabbing him in the lung and watching him bleed out, Anko slitting his throat while he hadn't been paying attention, the Hokage burning him alive with a giant fireball. The images passed through his mind before he focused chakra to his eyes. Pushing the foreign chakra out of his system, he blinked it away. It was too late, however. His moment of distraction already had him face first into the gravel of the roof, his arms tied tightly and quite hard behind his back. He growled. That was the last thing he saw as he felt a sharp pain on the back of his neck before oblivion took him. The Hokage sighed as he stood watching the presiding. The boy was standing proudly, his head raised high and his eyes staring into Sarutobi's own. The boy was tied to a stump in the middle of the large hall in the bottom floor of the council building. Uzumaki Naruto, for crimes against Konoha, relaying information to foreign shinobi about village security, assassinating a Konoha Chunin, and attempting to sabotage the village. You have been sentenced to death by being burnt alive. He didn't sigh, matter of fact Sarutobi didn't even bat an eyelash at what he was about to do. He felt disappointed that Naruto had failed the examination, but what he was about to do had to be done. Black Ops mission had no other result in failure. Thinking back to the bias trial, he thought about the boy's words. Flashback no jutsu. It had been 3 days since he had been captured, his chakra had been sealed and he had been searched. All his belongings had been taken and he had nothing, he was barely being fed, and the guards had taken to beating him as much as they could. Ibiki had interrogated him, but he hadn't cracked. Anko had tried, but he had merely spat blood at her and asked for more each time she tortured him. They had tried to get a Yamanaka to infiltrate his mind. He was curious as to why it hadn't worked, but the man had been driven almost insane. As it was, he was not going to be on active duty for a long time, if not ever. Anachi, the Yamanaka head, had been quite displeased to hear about the man's fate, but had said it was to be expected considering the child they were trying the method on. It was at this point he looked up to see Ibiki and Anko standing outside his cell. He grinned up at them. Is it time for me to get let out and leave? He said sarcastically. He knew they were here for one of 2 things, well actually 3 things now that he thought about it. They could be here to kill me, bring me for sentencing, or torture me some more. He sighed inwardly. He was damn near dead, and yet he was still making jokes. He watched as they unlocked the cell before moving in and grabbing him gruffly by the arms. It was then that he felt a sharp jerk, and he knew that he was being shunseened. Suddenly his vision, now blurry, was slowly taking in a large chamber filled with a lot of people in white robes. He sighed. The council room. Uzumaki Naruto, you have been charged with betraying Sunagakure. How do you plead? Naruto looked up at the council member and sneered, he knew this one. Homura, he had tried to get Naruto tried for his pranks many times before. He grinned and he quite honestly thought that Ibisu would be fine for his disrespectful addition on this one case. Not as guilty as your father is probably feeling after fornicating with whatever animal it was to breed you, he yelled out, mildly frowning at the gravel sound to his voice. The man spluttered and the rest of the council yelled out in anger. He smirked when he heard Anko snigger behind him. Very well. We have given you chances to redeem yourself and yet you have spat them back in our face, there is no choice. As a ninja of Konoha, you will be sentenced like a ninja, he said while staring down at Tsurutobi for a moment. The man received a glare in return and so he quickly returned his gaze on the blonde-haired brat. As such, for penalties of traitorous crimes against Konoha, we sentence you to death by Kaiten Jutsu, said Homura with a vicious smirk. Some of the council was smirking as well. It was about time they could get rid of the Kyuubi brat, and good riddance. Your sentence will be carried out by the Hokage in 1 day's time. Anko, Ibiki, remove him from our sight and return him to the holding cell. Until then, the two nins nodded before shunsining him away once more. Tsurutobi watched with cold eyes. Inside, however, he was sighing. I'm sorry Naruto-kun, for what I must do. Then flashback no jutsu. Blinking away the tears he felt beginning to grow, he stared back up at the boy. Pushing back the sleeves on his Hokage robe, he placed his hand in the first seal before looking up once more. He noted of course that the rest of the council as well as quite a large amount of nins were in attendance watching this scene. Originally it was to be a public execution, however Tsurutobi had commanded all information to be held in secret until a day after the execution. There would be no disrespecting a loyal shinobi, of course none of them knew that nor did they care. I'm sorry Naruto-kun, for what I must do, he said in a low voice, low enough that only Naruto could hear. He watched the boy frown a moment before a wide smile was plastered across his face. Oh, you still think I'm him, don't you? The blonde boy said with a laugh. Tsurutobi's eyes widened in shock. Looking closer he noticed the tattoos on the boy and it suddenly made sense. All of it came to him like a slap to the face. Mission complete, Hokage-sama. Enjoy the paint job. Naruto said with a smirk as he began laughing. The Hokage, jumping to his senses, immediately leaped back and watched in horror as the rest of the crowd just watched in confusion. Bet down. It was too late, however. He watched as one of the tattoos glowed for a minute before it seemed to burn away from the blonde skin. A fire started at the bottom of Naruto's feet almost rapidly as the rest of the seals began burning off. The Hokage noted that they were all resistant seals, something to offer protection or cushioning. Ainto Bushin Bakuha no Jutsu, the blonde said with a smile, as suddenly Naruto seemed to explode in a gigantic amount of ink and paint. Blue, red, purple, and yellow paint seemed to explode like a sea into the large execution chamber, covering most in a mixture of color and paint. The Hokage looked on in sheer amazement. In Konoha Market, people were all moving through town heading towards the marketplace, a normal rush hour routine, bustling along with groceries and children laughing and playing. Some examining wares while others were yelling out about their great merchandise, but it seemed that today Kami had decided to curse them with not a normal rush hour day in the market of Konoha. The large explosion had caught people off guard as they looked to see the thing. People had began screaming, however to most surprise there was no fire or debris, but bright colored paint was decorating the nearby wall, along with a few vendors' small shops. People nearby the wall were coated in paint as well. Suddenly another small bomb, and then another, and quickly followed by more. People began running around as the paint bombs seemed to be springing up all over the marketplace. It would only be later on that afternoon that anyone would realize that the paint had exploded outwards from the posters of an academy tournament. Academy grounds. Sasuke smirked as he faced off against this Niji boy. Apparently he was the head of the class in the year ahead of him. Everyone else before this had been beat quite thoroughly by either of the two. A small kid with long black hair and a Chinese-styled shirt. Sasuke had a blast beating into the ground. The boy, a year older than he, had no talent in Taijutsu and he had no chakra to use nin or Jinjutsu. Sasuke had beat the boy bloody. The Chunin teacher stood between the two watching them momentarily. Suddenly his hand shot down and he leaped back. Sasuke was already in motion, swinging a wide fist at the pale-eyed boy. The boy's hand was already moving to dodge it. This, of course, was when it happened. A large glob of black and purple goo had seemed to shoot out from the side and get him in the eyes, and no doubt the rest of his clothes. All he felt was a palm to the chin, and he smiled as he felt his fist connect with something. Both boys leaped back to rub the paint out of their eyes, and both looked at each other in surprise, if neither of them had done it. Looking around, they were slightly gobsmacked at seeing everyone around them, parents, children, and even the Chunin teachers covered in different colors of paint. Suddenly both covered their ears as a loud screech sounded throughout the small field. My new dress is ruined. A Sakura-like banshee screech sounded across Konoha. Both boys flinched. If it was discovered whoever it was that was responsible for this prank, then the person would surely be hurt severely. Hokage's office. Naruto sat in one of the chairs with his legs up on the desk, a bright orange book in his hands as he giggled while flipping through one of the pages. Sneezing suddenly he looked around wearily, whipping his nose he looked at the clock and smiled. Sarutobi Jiji should be here soon. Wonder how he enjoyed my painto bush, and shrugging he turned back to the perverted book. No wonder Ibisu-sensei liked this book. Execution chambers, council hall. Sarutobi looked around and scanned the damage. No one was hurt, covered in paint and thoroughly embarrassed by a genin, but no physical wounds. His smile suddenly widened as he realized the implications and the boy's final words. Standing up he quickly called for order. Silence. He watched with great amusement at what was a confused and angry crowd snap to attention. He frowned as he noticed some council members still mumbling their displeasures. As of this moment Uzumaki Naruto has completed his mission. He looked to the many confused and surprised looks, but raised a hand to stall protests. For the last week and a half Uzumaki Naruto has been on a Black Ops security mission. He was to infiltrate Konoha and test our security. Obviously, we failed. As he managed to not only assassinate the Hokage and a quite large force of our Jounin and Anbu, he also destroyed the council, and most likely destroyed quite large parts of the city. Calm yourselves, I merely mean that this paint is his interpretation of destroying something. I placed Uzumaki Naruto in the bingo book because had he failed his mission, I would have acknowledged him as a missing nin and executed him for treason as such. But seeing how he has not only completed his mission but duped us all, I ask that all of you go home and clean yourselves up. There will be plenty of D-rank missions for genin tomorrow, no doubt, about cleaning up the paint that is no doubt covering the city. Sarutobi's voice called over the crowd calmly and seriously, despite the fact that his face was covered in purple and pink paint. He didn't see anybody else in pink, beside the point. Shifting his eyes over to the council, he noted that some of them were about to yell out against him. Let me clarify in case some of you misunderstood me. You are dismissed. The mission is concluded and there will be a full Jounin and Anbu meeting next week to discuss the implications of a green genin infiltrating and destroying most of Konoha. He spoke with a hardened edge and sent a spike of killer intent toward some council members. It seemed that they had received the message clearly as they all began to file out. Some Jounins had begun laughing, while others were clearly shocked and a little annoyed at being caught so bluntly with their pants down. The rest that knew how to do so merely disappeared in a cloud of smoke. The Hokage watched most leave before he flipped through some hand seals and disappeared in a swirl of leaves. Hokage's office. Naruto noticed the incoming chakra source and as such pulled out a kunai and held it steady under his orange book. He giggled as he read the next page. He watched with mild amusement as a thoroughly soaked and paint-ridden Hokage appear before him. The man watched him for a moment. Don't leave until we've had a talk, he said as he marched out the door. The door slammed shut and Naruto didn't move. He continued reading for 15 minutes before the elder man came back, clean and dressed in formal Hokage robes with a new hat on as well. I'll keep those things in spares, do you, Hokage-sama? Naruto asked in amusement. The man glared at him before shutting the door behind him. He moved to the desk and sat in his chair while removing his pipe from one of the drawers, pulling out some tobacco and placing it in the pipe. He lit it before breathing in a large amount of the pipe's contents. Puffing out a ring of smoke, the man's eyes hardened from the humor they had before and stared at the boy across from his desk. The orange book disappeared quickly, as well as the kunai. The boy stood up and faced the Hokage, bowing. Report, Sandame said wearily. Sir. I began my mission with high skepticism. At first the task you gave me seemed almost impossible. However, after our meeting I returned home and though over the mission, assigning a messenger in your one-day grace period, I sent a Veruca to come see me. Talking to him, I had poured a strong sedative in both our tea. He drank it, but once asking me about the odd taste, I had merely said I didn't remember when I bought the tea or how old it was. After he was rendered unconscious, I had smuggled him out of the village through the Uchiha sector. Since it has been abandoned mostly since the massacre, it had easy access to get out. Haruka of course I had in a large sack. I met up with Izumo outside the wall as he investigated my sighting of going over the wall. After convincing him I was merely taking supplies to training ground 13, which was along the way I made my 53-kilometer journey to the small village of Kapante. Recently Ibisu had been teaching me there about how to study people. Information that one of the people I had been studying had recently went on a vacation. Holding Haruka inside the village was too much of a risk to my plans and as such I kept him there. With chakra-infused wire binding his wrists and feet, I also had a chakra suppressor seal on him as well. He is fine and fed him daily. After setting up my base command I had experimented with my Mizubushin. I knew that the clone could be made out of water, so I experimented and with my great amazement, I was able to create it with any real liquid. I then attempted it with something a bit thicker. So after experimenting for a couple hours I was able to make my new technique, the Painto Bushin no Jutsu. It was ingenious, however even with this I knew that there was still a great chance of getting caught, so as such, I decided to stay out of harm's way as much as possible. After layering seals on my clone, I was able to also fill him up for 3 weeks worth of chakra. I knew as a clone, he would probably burn more than a single week and a half, and in case of a fight he needed more as well. The resistant seals allowed him to take more than one hit, and I also place a trigger seal along it as well. The tournament for the academy was also my idea. I did up the posters and ingrained seals into those as well for explosion seals, except with paint as the debris instead of fire and brimstone. Anyway sir, afterwards I had merely spent my time meditating to control my clone at such a long distance. As such with most clones one is able to control them with thought or at least give general directions. But with being such a distance away and needing it to act like I needed to, I had meditated and entered my own mind to be able to control the clone properly. From there on, and it was merely convincing the teachers that such an event would be forthcoming and then posting the posters for it in key areas, the market, some walls and even a few at the bottom of the Hokage Tower. Needless to say it was easy. It was at this time however that I also discovered who my examiner was. Ibiki was talking to Anko-san about myself having been trained by Ibisu. She agreed to help and that was all that I had heard. I must apologize in advance however Hokage-sama for the destruction of my old apartment. You said no casualties and though you may be annoyed by it, none were made from the destruction of that place. Besides I have been operating out of a different apartment for 3.5 months now anyways sir. But anyways, the destruction of the apartment was used as a distraction before Ibiki caught on to my clone. He was examining the tattoos on its body too much for me to like. However in my fault I did not realize Anko being a clone, and I should have. She was less talkative and tried to stay out of mind as much as possible. So while I was distracted by trying to distract Ibiki and the clone Anko, she made it into my apartment to find the hair dye and contact solution for my clone's contacts. Naruto breathed in at this point. It was a long process to do these reports, but he by far preferred these ones rather than written. His hand hurt at the end of the written report for the self-defense incident. Staring back at Sarutobi, he noticed the man had been casually puffing on his pipe, but listening intently, he motioned with his hand for Naruto to continue. Afterwards you know what happened. I was captured and brought in for torture and interrogation. I lost a lot of resistant seals on that one, anyways. Afterwards it was just waiting until the execution for everyone to see the village pariah to be destroyed. I just shunted it into your room and waited until you got here. Naruto finished his report and bowed to the man in front of him. After standing at attention he watched the Hokage carefully. The old man was serious and contemplated. Aside from completely bypassing security and making a giant mess of D-rank missions for the genin, you did nothing wrong. Your mission was complete along with your secondary objectives. I'm pleased to give you a passing grade on your evaluation. However, with you passing your evaluation this also brings me to having to be disappointed. Not with you, don't get me wrong Naruto-kun, however with the villagers and most nins going to be annoyed with you for being listed as a missing nin and painting the village in a bright spectrum of colors. And some troubling information has come to light. I need you and Ibisu to find out if it holds any truth. Sarutobi continued with a soldier's voice. He waited and looked to the corner of the room. From the shadows Ibisu seemed to melt from them coming into the light. He moved over to the middle of the room and patted Naruto on the shoulder. The boy seemed to beam at that even though his expression never changed. Ibisu and Naruto, your mission is to infiltrate Sunagakure and discover if they have any ill intentions towards Konoha. We have received troubling information on them considering ending the trade agreement and possibly leading to war. You both are going in undercover to find out. Your contact for this mission will be Shiranui Genma. He will meet you in 6 months at the border of Wind Country and you will meet him in the village of Fundo. Any information you have discovered at that point will be given there and you will make future meeting arrangements with him. These scrolls contain the identities I have crafted for you. They will be in the bingo book by tomorrow morning. You will have 4 days to prepare. Naruto, as this is your first A-rank mission, expect to be prepared not to come back to the village from 6 months to even a year, possibly longer. Do you think you can handle this Naruto? Sarutobi's voice cut through the air like a kunai through the jugular vein. Naruto thought over his words. Am I ready? To put my life on the line for the village that hates me? To possibly put myself in the position where I have to kill once again? Naruto stared up at Ibisu carefully. The man showed no noticing to him and finally Naruto looked back at Sarutobi. It doesn't matter if I'm ready or not sir. I'm doing this to make sure none else in my village have to. You said it yourself sir, I passed the evaluation, which means I'm prepared to do my duty for my village. Being ready has nothing to do with this. Naruto spoke confidently and quickly, his face remained indifferent and he looked as the man smiled sadly a moment. Very well, take these scrolls and leave when you're prepared. Good luck to both of you, leave with me any personal items you feel you do not trust alone. As Sarutobi finished he watched as Naruto untied his headband and pulled out a small folded up piece of paper from his back pocket. Wrapping the picture in the headband he handed it to Sarutobi before bowing. Ibisu, already missing his headband and instead just wore a regular black bandana, moved forward placing a fat envelope into the Hokage's desk. Both Naruto and Ebisu watched silently as the Hokage moved over and opened the Yondame's painting to reveal a safe. Sarutobi opened it before placing the items inside and closing it. He turned back to the two and nodded to them. He watched with a proud smile as student and teacher walked out of his office. "Good luck you two, I hope you don't need it." Jin's eyes stared down at the now deceased target. Thoughtfully, he observed the woman's black hair framing her cold and lifeless face. Shaking his head, he idly thought that killing would get harder not easier. Blue eyes moved upwards to stare at the rooftop across the street. Atop of the limestone building sat his sensei and father, watching with a blank face. "It's like he said originally, no one could teach you how to handle your first kill. You just moved on with your life, or you became surrounded in it." He did however say killing got easier. Other senseis said it didn't, but he noticed that there was no guilt. It was a mission to defend his country, live or die, survival or death. Sighing, he opened the small scroll pouch upon his vest and let the small scroll slide out and into his hands, spreading out the scroll upon the cold stone floor of the alleyway. He unsheathed the woman's katana from her back and eyed the razor-sharp blade for a moment before bringing it down upon the dead woman's neck, severing her head from her body. He ignored the blood spray across his vest as he sheathed the katana and then placed the dead nin's head upon the large circle in the middle of the scroll, flipping through 6 hand seals. He then placed his hand upon her head and sending Charka through it called out, "Ninpo. Fujin." He watched as the head seemed to almost melt into the scroll before it snapped shut and rolled up after the sealing was complete. Sliding the scroll back into its pocket upon his vest, he buttoned it shut and looked at his sensei that now stood in front of him. "Jin, we have completed the objective and now we shall go speak with our friendly Sunanin about these oh so incriminating documents." His father pushed his sunglasses up his nose before moving backwards. As he stepped closer to the wall, he seemed to just melt into the shadows until he could no longer be distinguished. Jin looked back at the lifeless body emotionlessly, standing and looking to the sun. He determined it was almost noon, and his fingers slipped into 2 one-handed seals, causing him to disappear in a cloud of dust and papers from nearby newspapers littering the alley floor. "Kill the family, you said, loot the home and burn it down." Jin's father's voice was blank, a slate of almost supreme monotone. If he had been a less experienced ninja, Baki might have considered flinching at the distinct lack of expression from the man. He noticed almost scarily that his son seemed to have the same unflinching mask. "I did, so am I to assume the objective is concluded?" Baki stated, separating his voice from any nervousness he was feeling. There was something about this duo that created an aura of power, a hidden one, but one that remained nonetheless. "The mission is complete," Kaido Nadana stated blankly. He waited and watched as Baki slowly moved his hand to his money pouch, Baki's eyes never leaving Kaido's own. However, the one word stopped all motion from the other ninja. The man almost tensed. Had he been anyone else he may not have noticed it. The man's hand remained stationary. However, in his side vision he noticed the man's students tensing up as well. "These documents are really interesting," Kaido stated with a slick smile growing upon his face, and Baki contained himself from widening his eyes. He hadn't thought that the missing nin would have those documents. The intel he had received had everyone thinking she had sent them to the daimyo. As for his reasons of putting a lock on most of the village's resources and missions. They say that Sunanins were responsible for the Corinto village massacre. Well, that's the gist of it. Most of it is trying to get across the point of how it was necessary. I wonder how much I could sell these for to a daimyo to inform him of how truly loyal his shinobi are to him. After all, that village wasn't to be destroyed, was it? Kaido peered over his sunglasses, his golden eyes staring into the other man's. His smile however stopped and his face melted back into that same stone-faced it had before as he raised a hand lazily pushing the glasses back up his nose covering his eyes. "Worry not Sunanin, you have something I want and we have something you want, keep your pay." Kaido spoke carefully. Baki eyed him a moment before lowering his hand from his money pouch, conveniently also placed near reaching distance of his kunai holster. His hands moved to the front of him, his right placed over his left, almost standing at attention. However, he was prepared to defend himself, he thought. "What is it that we can offer you for such a document?" Baki calmly asked. He eyed his students' nervousness as they faced towards the only other child nearby. The boy must have been only 10, maybe younger. He grimaced. A child that calm in the face of 3 potential enemies had either great skill or great arrogance. Personally, he hoped it was the latter. Kaido reached into his coat slowly to make Baki know he wasn't drawing anything lethal before removing the talked about documents, handing them over. He also placed a large dark green book at the front, the Konoha symbol on the front, a page bent further inside the pages marked a spot. Baki frowned before taking the documents and shoving them on the inside of his flak jacket before he opened the book, flipping through pages idly. His eyes widened as he skimmed through Konoha's latest bingo book. Realizing this, he flipped to the marked page and observed both pictures of the people in front of him. Kaido Nadana. 28 hair color. Black eye color. Brown height. 181, weight. 67, gender. Male rank. Takubetsu Jounin crimes. Murder of Konoha citizen, 2 counts. Murder of Konoha shinobi, 3 counts. Orders of sighting. Kaido is especially skilled and murdered the civilians in cold blood, thus by the order of the Hokage of Sunagakure it is to be known, he be killed on sight. Jin Nidonage. 10 hair color. Brown eye color. Blue height. 144, weight. 40, gender. Male rank. Chunin crimes. Murder of Konoha citizen, 17 counts. Murder of Konoha shinobi, 2 counts. Abilities. Journeyman Seal Master, specialty explosive seals, be worn upon chasing, known to have set multiple large explosive seals. Orders of sighting. Jin Nidon, like his father, has committed acts of murder within knowledge of what he was doing, and with his high threat and knowledge of seals, is a danger to everyone, thus, he is to be killed on sight. Baki looked up at Kaido as the man eyed him. There was no doubt in his mind that if these 2 shinobi put up a fight he and his students would lose, even with Gaara, the boy was a sealer, and thus would pose a giant problem. He shoved the bingo book into his vest's inside pocket before watching them carefully. It's easy, you have safe harbor, we wish to come with you and become Sunanin. You win in the aspect that you get to complete your mission with exceptional successes, as I'm sure you don't want those documents anywhere but destroyed or in your possession, and you also get a Jounin and Chunin with excellent skills on your side. Kaido was talking almost as if it was obvious the man was going to take them in, however thinking over the situation Baki really couldn't see a problem, sure it would be a hassle, but the child's sealing experience was too much to be desired. Konoha had been blessed by having such great sealing experts, because of that reason alone it had granted them a significant advantage in the Great Ninja Wars. Baki carefully weighed the cons. With this, however, was the chance that Konoha had discovered them harboring fugitives. It could pose a problem, however thinking it over it would be just as easy to change their identity and send their trail in another direction. You, of course, understand that what you're offering is too good for me to believe, thus I'll wish that you stay beside me at all times during this trip and that your son gives up any and all ink and paper on him. Baki knew it wouldn't do much considering if the boy was as dangerous as the book said, he would be smart enough to just use his blood, but he was narrowing the damage the boy could cause. Hi, it's fine with us. I'm tired of having to run all over the place. Gets annoying you know. Kaido said calmly, nodding to his son. Baki watched mildly as the boy began removing paintbrush after paintbrush from inside his coat, handing them over. He took the 8 brushes and took several pints of ink from the boy. He frowned when he watched the boy begin to remove more from the inside of his coat. After about 3 minutes the boy handed over a wad of explosive notes and Baki's eyes widened. Carefully placing them into his backpack, he eyed the boy once more before looking to his students. They raised their gaze up at him except for Gaara. The boy was glaring balefully at Jin. Let's go, he said stiffly, turning and heading back towards Suna. He eyed Kaido moving beside him silently, listening behind him. He was almost amazed at the boy's change. Ah, that's so much better than having to be stiff and uptight, eh? Jin smiled brightly as he began moving with the other students, moving beside the blonde girl with pigtails. He smiled at her cheerily. Hiya, Jin Nidana, nice to meet you. Jin's voice was bright and cheerful, almost impossible to believe that it belonged to a boy that, just moments before, had been calmly locked in a stare down with them that could have ended up in a battle to the death. The blonde eyed him for a moment before nodding briefly. Subaku no Tamari. She stared back ahead at the road they were following, shifting her large battle fan behind her a bit. She noticed the boy's frown before grimacing slightly as she felt the bloodlust radiating from her younger brother. The boy seemed almost oblivious before he turned to the boy in black with battle paint on his cheeks. He eyed him a moment and the large wrapping on the boy's back. At first he had brushed it off as a duffel bag, but seeing it closer, he could honestly say he didn't know. The boy, noticing the attention on him, looked at him and timidly raised his hand. His brothers quickly halted that action. Subaku no Kankuro, the brown-haired boy, eyed him with his eyes raised before shifting his focus to the boy radiating enough killing intent for it to be felt in space. Red hair that carelessly fell around his face, a large red tattoo upon his forehead for the kanji of love, and the boy's green eyes were surrounded by black bags indicating insomnia. Can I help you? Because you seem to be a tad bit upset with me. You stole my kill. Briefly Jin's eyes studied the red-haired boy. Sand at the boy's feet was moving around, waving back and forth slowly, like a snake ready to strike. The boy was dangerous, that was for sure. He would be an enemy not to be underestimated. Boy, don't look so grumpy dude, it's not like you won't have a chance to kill all you want whenever. Geez, at least you don't have to worry about hunting after you all the time. Cheer up. The brown-hair boy smiled as he moved beside the red-haired boy and shifted his arm around the kid's shoulders. He ignored the startled looks from the Suna team, including the red-haired child. He had felt the sand beginning to rise up a bit, but he had disrupted the flow to the sand with a bit of maneuvering and some wiggling of his chakra. He couldn't keep it up for much longer considering how much chakra he was draining just doing so, but he kept his face in the same smile he had a moment before. Tamari and Kankuro stood slack-jawed at the boy that had casually laid his arm around their psychotic brother. Baki, however, shivered at the thought. The boy that young, able to get past Gaara's sand, with a few years' experience he will be a scary sight to see. I would hate to have him as an enemy. Baki's eyes shifted towards Jin's father, Kaido, when he saw the man's eyes look farther ahead. With this small mile-long road, the last stretch of trees before it hit the barren wastes of Wind Country, he knew it would be the point of ambush. The two that had been tailing the group since the village most likely had a number of them further ahead. Studying Kaido carefully, he caught the man's eye as he blinked 3 times, a little awed at his chakra detection ability. He suddenly got hit by a stun thought. Boy, don't look so grumpy, not like you won't have a chance to kill all you want. Kaido wasn't the one who had noticed. The boy had shifting his gaze back to the young child who was now walking side by side with a stunned and rather subdued Gaara. He couldn't help but shiver at the thought of the benefits this boy would bring to Suna. It wasn't much longer, only about 3 minutes later in fact, when the two from behind sprung upon the red-haired child and the brown-haired missing nin at the back of the group, going for the easiest kills. The 4 shuriken impacted against a large wall of sand that had risen out of the ground at the last second, while it stayed there allowing the kunai of the man who followed the barrage to stab into it. The sand seemed to almost collapse after this, before swarming around the man in an almost unbreakable cocoon. The other man was equally as unlucky. He had skipped the shuriken and moved directly in for a mortal blow on the brown-haired 10-year-old. His kunai dug deep into the boy's throat, and he grinned sadistically as he heard the child cough a little bit. Idly he found it strange as to the lack of blood. Suddenly his eyes widened in realization as he set to disrupt his chakra flow by stopping it suddenly and then allowing it to continue. The surroundings bled away to reveal the 10-year-old facing him alone, in the same area that they had just ambushed. Pushing away the thought of his teammates taking care of the others, he charged the boy quickly. Had he been more observant he would have noticed the lack of blood or sign of battle on the boy or on the surrounding area that would have detailed such an ambush. Just before he hit the child, however, he felt a cold chill run through his body before he fell to the ground lifelessly. Jin eyed the man blankly. Silly man hadn't even noticed when he had a clone following him and his partner. He had switched before the man's charge and caught him in a multi-layered jinjutsu. After that all he did was apply some chakra and directed it straight into the lobes in his brain. He had allowed it to travel to the back, right at the connection of the spinal column and the brain stem, before allowing it to pop for a lack of a better term. The man had been dead before he had hit the ground. Looking to the man's partner, he stared blank-faced at the now mashed clothing and equipment that was slowly being dragged away by a large amount of sand and blood. Blinking and feeling the chakra signature move behind him, he rapidly flipped through 2 one-handed seals before thinking the name. Hawarimi no Jutsu. Exchanging himself with the dead body of his attacker's teammate, Jin slipped his fingers rapidly through another set of seals before slamming his hands onto the ground in front of him. He watched as a large spike of earth shot from the ground he was just occupying, impaling the nin and his friend's body. The large spike of solid earth shot through the man's ribsage, crushing it and piercing vital organs in the process. Oten. Tsuchi Kasui no Jutsu, Jin said casually. Looking around he noticed everything had calmed down, looking over as Kaido had rendered a man unconscious. Even before the second man was in a position to engage Baki, both men had easily dispatched the last attacker. Looking over the unconscious man he shook his head before turning back to the nin that had jumped him from behind. His face shifted to a blank slate when he saw the large leaf symbol upon the hit I-8. He ignored the chilled feeling in his back as he helped the rest of the group clean up. He wouldn't realize till much later that all of this had been just an insidious and unique plan. One that had worked wonders in its maker's opinion. Back in Konoha, Okijama, I have a report. A voice called up. The aged man put down his orange-covered novel, creasing an ear in the page he was on before plopping it onto his desk. He waved his hand. Hi, continue Ushi-san, he stated firmly. Saratobi Hiruzen's eyes gained a calm calculated look as he studied the ox-masked Anbu carefully. He hid a smirk as the man shifted from one foot to another briefly, before standing at attention in front of the great professor of shinobi. Hi Hokage-sama, as requested we had Uruchi-san, our civilian insider, request the job be from the Kirin. They were requested to assassinate Jin and Kaido, due to them having killed Uruchi-san's family. It was listed as an A rank and carried out immediately, however the men had to be framed as Konoha-nin, so they had been given the hit I-8 from Uruchi-san, stating that they were family heirlooms. Without question the nins were dispatched in to ambush Jin and Kaido, along with what appears to be a Suna team. The ambush backfired as it seemed that Jin had previous knowledge to the ambush. His chakra sensing abilities are astounding. After that the ambush began. It was almost a slaughter. The Kirinins were quickly subdued. One was subdued into unconsciousness and interrogated by Kaido, revealing their mission. They did not ask information regarding the village the nins were from as it seemed obvious. Afterwards Kaido executed the prisoner. Jin and Kaido are now to be believed as well-hunted and truly dangerous Missing Nin, thus it is expected that Suna will take them up quickly. Ushi stood still as he finished his report. He had been amazed by the boy's amazing ability to detect the men far before he thought possible. With Abisu training the boy, he had become quite a diamond from the rough stone he had once been. He perked up noticing the Hokage nodding as if expecting as much. Very good then, Ushi-san, as of this moment your knowledge of Uzumaki Naruto and Ebisu being Jin and Kaido Nadana is a SS class secret. Upon revealing this information to anyone aside from myself, you will be branded a traitor and thus executed quickly. Do you understand? The Hokage's flat tone left no room for argument, but then again, Ushi thought briefly, that's why I joined Anbu in the first place. He nodded quickly before turning around and marching out the door, leaving Sarutobi to his thoughts. Very well Naruto-kun, I have given you 2 years in. Now the rest lies to both of you, let us hope that your inexperience does not become your downfall. Turning around in his chair he faced his large window examining his village. He had a feeling that the boy would quickly become a diamond in his ranks, one perhaps he would be able to use. Turning back in his chair to face his large stack of paperwork, he eyed the first form on the desk. Nanbu Group status. Active. It is apparent that Councilman Danzo has ignored the Hokage's orders, referring to the Na group known as Root, thus confirming prior beliefs into treason. More information on the group required in order to truly calculate the amount of missions and income that Danzo has been diverting from Konoha. He sighed, it seemed Naruto had a big job when he got back, one he hoped he would be ready for. Anbu Torture and Interrogation Head Office. Anko groaned loudly as another large pile of files, folders and papers landed on the desk she was currently occupying. Leaning the chair she was sitting in back onto 2 legs, she twisted her neck to the side until a popping sound was heard before letting it back. Odd. Paperwork sucks. I swear when I get my hands on that brat I'm gonna fucking castrate him. Ever since that brat's goddamn evaluation we've been running ragged down here, security increase, security clearance updates, background checks, hell I have had 3 different sectors that have asked for the same fucking person for a background check. And what's worse is he's been clean as far as I can tell, all 3 times. Anko whined loudly, his partner on the other side of the rather bland and Spartan office was rubbing his temples slowly. It's because a green genin was able to undermine and infiltrate the village of Konoha Anko, and not only that he did it under our goddamn nose. Not to mention the boy was captured and tortured by several elite Anbu, including ourselves, and none of us truly clued into the tattoos having any more use than design. The real blow below the belt was that 2 senior T&I team members couldn't tell a clone from a boy. Ibiki stated calmly, it was certainly an irk to have to deal with all the paperwork. The increase in security had caused a massive headache in the T&I division. Most of the security backgrounds were dealt with specifically by them and the Intel division. However, the Intel division was swamped with more work than they were dealing with, and thus they had started recruiting the T&I to help them keep up to the demand. Ibiki would have laughed, the boy had caused quite the amount of damage to a lot of people's pride that day. He would never have sworn he would live to see the day he saw the Hyuga lose their cool face of indifference to that of plain embarrassment or loathing. He grinned, he certainly would buy the boy a drink when he next saw him. He was sure that Anko would give him her own thanking. After all, Danzo had certainly been on the receiving end of a lot of political backlash ever since they had found out the demon container had gained an apprenticeship from a law he pushed forward, and Danzo was easily second on Anko's shit list, her first of course being reserved for her ex-sensei. Not many had known Danzo had attempted to have Anko immediately brought into the Root division. He'd wished her trained and treated as an emotionless machine, so she would reveal Orochimaru's secret techniques. He grinned, the Sandaime had immediately stepped in and denied Danzo's request. Afterwards Danzo attempted to take Anko anyways. The Hokage then had Root disbanded and had punished Danzo. As it was, the man was walking a fine line bordering treason. No one knew when he was about to walk across that shaded line, but they knew it would spark a civil war that no one wanted to deal with. Council room. He is becoming too powerful. As it is, that boy embarrassed the entire village with that ridiculous stunt he pulled. A furious Kaheru spat out, her voice echoing throughout the chamber, filled with numerous people. Some of the larger clan's heads frowned. It was not a good idea to be hosting a meeting without the presence of the Hokage, as it was they were all on thin ice due to the actions of a few people. Shikaku Nara frowned as he studied the events transpiring. It was not the most gracious of events, and, in his history of being clan head, he had never heard of this much of a response, but then again, in his entire memory, he couldn't remember a 10-year-old boy eluding the entire village and succeeding in a statistically impossible mission. The boy is powerful and that power should be harnessed, but not by a man whose motives are almost as questionable as Orochimaru's once were. Danzo called out bitterly, since his attempts at getting the boy under his thumb had been thwarted, he had been practically seething. Shikaku looked to his friend Inochi when he felt the man nudge him, shifting his eyes to the area the man had nodded towards. His eyes widened a fraction as he noticed several Anbu in the surrounding. Most of them had remained stock still, but his experience had picked up on the small things, the sudden straightness, and the clenched hands. If he listened carefully, he could even hear the grating of teeth from some of the members. He had done his time in Anbu. He had come to know that in a group such as that, even if you don't get along with your teammate, you put your life on the line for them, and they did the same for you. Ibisu often confused most people by his peculiar leadership. Most seemed to think he never went out of his way to help a teammate. It was true to an extent, however Ibisu never put the lives of his team on the line by taking members who were not experienced for the mission. Rookie recruits were also the most vocal when attending his training regimes. He was too harsh, or he was too aggressive. However, the veteran Anbu, and even some of the rookies, after taking his training courses, had realized the reason after some digging. He had lost his wife when she had been chosen as part of the first wave against the Kyuubi. Him being a Chunin at the time had tried to declare her not ready, but the acting Jounin in command had ignored him and demanded that able fighters up front. Ibisu had been injured from his Chunin exam just before and had not been able to help. She was one of the first to be annihilated by the Kyuubi's fierce rampage. After that Ibisu became a firm believer of never taking a team he didn't have faith in, and while his training methods were brutal, no one could argue the effectiveness of them. Any team that Ibisu had been with had a statistical increase of skill by a minimum of 32%. It was largely due to this that most Anbu members held the man in great respect and also great hesitancy. Now this part isn't going to be good. He heard his other friend say, looking over towards Akamichi Chauza. He noticed the man's beady eyes staring down to a lower back entrance to the council chambers. He held down a nervous gulp staring down at the figure of the Hokage. The man's robes, though white, seemed to almost blur and blend in with the shadows. His 3 Anbu escort beside him calmly standing in battle gear. "You're one to speak, Danzo. If it wasn't for you, the demon brat wouldn't have this power in the first place." An older-looking man spoke up from near the higher rows, his graying hair frayed around the edges and a small bald spot on the crown of his head, beginning to show his age. "The boy is a risk to everyone. If he has this much power now, then what happens if he begins to harness the power of the demon he holds inside of him? How can we be sure that he would be able to harness that power and control it? How can we be sure that it will be safe for our village?" Koharu hissed out venomously. It was no secret that Koharu had a bad grudge against the Kyuubi after losing a vast majority of her clan to the Kyuubi's second strike against the western edge of Konoha. Buchan Danzo had began to speak before being cut off when everyone in the council chambers looked wide-eyed at the figure in the middle of the room, his white robes and hat with red stripes and the symbol for fire on his hat. Nobody mistook the Hokage of Konoha. The man had his arms behind his back inside his long cloak sleeves, his cold eyes calmly scouring the council room and its members, making most shiver after his eyes pass over them. "Do not try and intimidate us, Iritobi," Koharu stated loudly. Suddenly the man's eyes shifted towards her again. Before looking around once more, his back straightened and the old Hokage stood up straight, adorning the presence of that once veteran shinobi. "It seems that my council has taken it upon themselves to host a meeting. I'm sure that my messenger got delayed and you just started without me. Due to my being late, I apologize." The man's voice was calm, but a steely edge was hidden underneath that calm facade. The man was angry, and no doubt the council would not like the direction of this meeting. "It seems that in this time of uncertainty, I have gained a problem, one that I was apparently not aware of. Is there something you advisors wish to ask me?" The man, putting the emphasis on advisors, watched calmly, his eyes picked out, most of them shifting in their places, no one having the guts to say anything. "Ah, very well then. Now, due to the timing of my arrival, I would like to point out that this year's Chunin exam will be hosted in Iowa. Does anyone have any objections against sending teams to represent Konoha?" He watched many of the council shift a bit more before all murmuring either agreement or disagreement. Hamura stood and cleared his throat calmly. Unlike his teammate, he knew when to deal with Sarutobi. It seemed she had forgotten this man's true power. "Okage-sama, is there a particular team you would be sending? As I have heard of a few rising genin, specifically ones Hagane Katetsu and Kamizuki Izumo. They have refused to attend the Chunin exam 3 times and failed their first one. I have heard that should they be convinced, they would easily pass." Hamura calmly watched as the Hokage seemed to mull the thought over. He nodded once before looking around. "Anyone else that seems to spring to mind?" There was utter silence. "Very well, I shall inform the 2 of their attempt to make Chunin once more and hopefully they will choose to attend." The Hokage turned around before beginning to walk to the door. Mentally he chuckled, it was like molding putty. 3, 2, 1. He stopped at the sound of Koharu's voice. He turned around quietly, facing the council once more. "The boy is too powerful, Sarutobi." Koharu called out loudly. He narrowed his eyes. It wasn't unexpected, this to be the cause of this uncalled meeting, but he had hoped, naively he might add, that it wasn't. "The more powerful he is, the more useful he is to the village. It is not your decision whether or not he gains power." Sarutobi spoke, a little coldly. "If the demon takes over now, he would already have his own power, added to that of the boys. He's a danger we can't risk. He could and would destroy the village." Koharu was quite vehement in her argument. Homura sighed. He sat down prepared to deal with the next part of this argument. He wasn't going to help Kaharu this time. She was digging her own political grave. Let her lay in it. The demon has no sway over the boy, and it will remain so. We have been told this many times by Jira, a drunkard and a shameless man who enjoys cheap thrills. Your third student, though still loyal to the village, is almost a waste as much as your other two. Danzo cut off quickly. My past failures are not up for discussion here. Besides, you of all people, Danzo, are the last person that should be calling me on failures. As I was saying, Jiraiya is second to only maybe one person in the elemental nations on sealing. If he says the seal is solid, we must believe him. The aged man was quickly beginning to lose his patience. He had enough of the matter. The boy is a risk. Perhaps we should just put the cage bird seal upon him to keep him loyal. An older Hyuga spoke up from the crowd. Shikaku snorted loudly, drawing attention to him. The Hyuga glared at the elder Nara. I do not remember speaking to you. The Hyuga council member spoke scathingly. Shikaku snorted again before staring at the man calmly. You're just in a huff because the boy made you have to clean the blue off you for the last 3 days. Still some in your hair. By the way, the rest of the council quieted down after that. Some grumbling. The infiltration mission was a large sore spot for the council. Chaozu roared in laughter as he saw the Hyuga lift a hand to his hair before scowling at being had. That is not the point. The man continued gruffly. No, not at all. Your point is to attempt to brand a completely loyal shinobi, all based on suspicion. I understand we're ninja and suspicion is as good a reason as any, but not when it's as biased just because of a demon sealed in the container. Besides, we have no idea how the cage bird seal would react to the Kyuubi seal. Would you really risk the name of the Hyuga if you were to incidentally release the beast? Inachi spoke up bitterly. Personally, the subject was getting a bit old. It's already difficult enough to stop the children from asking questions. I've had to physically restrain Hana from going out to find out why someone smells so strongly of a fox. After all, with how much the villagers hunt them, I'm amazed we have any left in Fire Country. She has been becoming extremely devoted to looking for the scent's origin. And Yuzukatsume got out tiredly. The canine head was well known for her vicious streak and high endurance. The sound of her being weary of such a task let everyone know just how much of a task her daughter, Hana, made the issue into. Not to mention forcing my daughter to make sure she never uses her talents upon him. Do you know how hard it is to explain to a little girl that she can't go into the specific mind of a certain nin without giving the reason? I've had to brush it off as the boy having a bloodline. Inachi ground out tiredly. He rubbed his temples while another member of the council chirped up. Well, chirpy would not be how most, if anyone, described the Aburam clan head. My boy Shino as well has noticed some problems with the boy during the academy, all of which he has brought to my attention that I have informed him of the boy having a bloodline. His bugs were quite hesitant to go near the boy due to his high chakra levels. As it is, there is also a flavor to his charka. Aburam Shibi studied the rest of the council before turning his eyes, along with everyone else, towards the Hokage, clearing his throat. Perhaps, the Hokage said slowly, before nodding as if agreeing with himself. I have decided that if anyone brings up issue with the boy, whether your children notice discrepancies or any others ask about issues about it, they will be informed it is due to a new bloodline just birthed to him. Obviously the full details to anyone's knowledge will be an S-class secret, but the real reason being the Kyuubi demon, mentions of it outside of this room is still punishable by death. Sarutobi's stern voice cut through the quiet council chamber like a kunai through a mizubushin. His eyes wandered around a moment before nodding to himself, as no one seemed to disagree. But what about the boy, Sarutobi? Kaharu called out venomously. He is a threat and must be dealt with. Just because you're too senile to see such a thing makes me wonder about your abilities to run this village. There was a small gasp in the room. If there were any stronger shinobi in the village of Konoha, aside from Sarutobi Hiruzen, one would be hard-pressed to find it. Never before had Sarutobi been called out by a council member based on his decisions regarding the village so openly, even if it was about the demon boy. Sarutobi remained completely calm and eyed the woman for a moment before speaking. Perhaps, I can ill afford bigots and naive advisors on my council any longer. You are dismissed, Kaharu. Sarutobi eyed her for a moment as the rest of the council looked gobsmacked. A council member had never been removed from position since the first Hokage was still around. To have it done so blandly, and let alone the teammate of the current Hokage, was a truly explosive statement. Sarutobi would not tolerate questions on the boy any longer by anyone. But, you can't do that, Kaharu started weakly. The rest of the council remained quiet, watching, some with pity and others with blank expressions. Hiruzen, it seemed, finally had enough as he turned to her. Make no mistake, this is no democracy. This council was made purely to assist me. You forget that your Hokage was chosen to run this village by the former Hokages, thus I am the law. In this village I am God, and you men and women will listen to what I have to say and what I order. Any of you who disagree will be considered traitors. I will no longer put up with any of your deviousness." And Danzo, the man raised his head, locking eyes with the professor. "You have one more mistake before I gut you like the treasonous swine you are. You'll be happy to know your Kirin were unsuccessful. Naruto-san and Abisu-san are perfectly fine, and we are now short 4 Kirin in the world, thus, everything is well." Actually, to be specific, they pushed any doubt from Abisu's and Naruto's target's mind. Sarutobi ended his words with a smile. "Let the man stew on that." Turning around, he moved towards the exit, calling out a brief word before leaving. Dismissed, he grinned as he walked out. "I have the plan in order. The council already knows that Danzo has attempted this before. Let them think that he is doing it again. Kazukiya's tower. So you two wish to join Suna's ranks?" The Kazukiya let out slowly, the man's cold eyes taking in the three before him. Jin and Kaido standing relaxed despite the tension in the room. Baki was standing off to the side, eyeing the situation carefully. "Hi, you have safe harbor, and we have skills you want. My only request is my boy be placed as a Chunin and myself as Jounin. And for that small thing you gain a highly skilled Jounin and a budding seal master. Of course any of your prisoners you no longer need, if you don't need to dispose of them right away, may be given to my boy for seal experimentation, but that is up to you. I merely request that he not be penalized if he is to do such to prisoners he catches out on the field." Kaido's voice never wavered for even a moment, straight and to the point. The Kazukiya smirked. It was a little odd that two such as these were coming to Suna, considering the village's alliance between Konoha and itself. But then again, Suna, nor any other village for that matter, would ever turn down a potential seal master. As it was, Baki's report on the boy's skills so far was promising news indeed. With more practice he was sure Suna would have its second seal master, this one however having no problems with experimentation on living subjects. "Make no mistake, Kaido is it?" The Kazukiya said briefly. He shut the dossiers in front of him before clasping his hands in front of him, peering over his knuckles. He took the two in. "Sunagakure is no pushover village like your previous one. We are numbered low in the shinobi department, thus we are required to be extremely more disciplined and skilled, thus you will realize that power, here, is key. And it seems you and your boy have such a feat in spades. Your request is not unreasonable. Obviously you will be placed under a 6-month watch to make sure you are, of course, not lying or doing this for other villages. After those months you will be allowed to leave the village unescorted, but until then, for any mission leaving the confines of the village, you will be required to be teamed with a teammate of at least Jounin rank. Both of you." The Kazukiya moved his hand slowly as he reached into his desk drawer, the top right, Jin noticed idly. Pulling out 2 hit I-8 with black cloth wrapped around them and the shining Suna symbol embossed on the front of the metal plate. "These are your new hit I-8, you may do what you wish with the others, but make sure they never leave the village. You may both pick up your Jounin and Chunin vests, respectively, with my secretary. You will be given a week to get yourself accustomed to the village, afterwards you will receive word by our Anbu." The Kazukiya gestured briefly to the cloak-covered shinobi standing in the corner to the man's right, about 5'8" with a sand-colored turban and a cloth face mask covering everything but his eyes, which were staring at them through a pair of tinted goggles. "Yes, anyways, good day gentlemen. Oh by the way, boy." The Kazukiya gestured to Jin. He perked up and stood straight at being addressed. "Hi, Kazukiya-sama." Jin asked calmly. "I'll ask you to make up a list of materials you will need to craft exploding notes, along with the basic prisoner chakra suppression seals and other such things. You will be given a list of which seals would be needed for resupplying our stocks. My secretary will give you the list on your way out. Make a list of materials needed by the end of the day and give it back to her. You will be paid 100 ryo for every tag you finish, and any materials not used will be left with you for whatever you desire. Also, I suggest you make yourself up some prices, as I'm sure most shinobi from Suna will be pleased to stop in and buy things from you, be it sealing scrolls or otherwise. You are not required to do so for the other shinobi, but it is an order for the restocking of our armory." The Kazukiya left no room for talking as he waved them away. The father and son pair left out the door, meanwhile Baki moved to the center of the room facing his cage. "Watch them Baki, if they make so much as a hint of disloyalty or falseness to their story, kill them," the Kazukiya said calmly before waving Baki away. The man nodded before walking out the door as well. The Kazukiya eyed the dossiers in front of him a moment before tearing them up, moving over the fireplace in the side of his office. He shoved them in and watched as the papers shriveled up in the flames. "We shall see what those two bring us. Hopefully it is as they say and they are just missing nins. It would be good to have some new blood and new skill with us." The Kazukiya looked back to his desk and frowned, moving over to it once more. His eyes scanned the piece of paper lying on his desk. "Kazukiya-san, it seems that your daimyo has not been kind to you in the past few months. I imagine that this will only continue in the oncoming times. I offer you a solution." Such a thing cannot be discussed on paper as the chances of interception are too great, thus I ask of you to be free this time next month. We shall have words in person. Otakage. His eyes scanned the message carefully, he already had a great suspicion of who this Otakage was, after all, not many people had the snake summon contract to deliver mail for them. Yes, we shall see. Unknown location, assumed to be Easter name. How long since the boy was last seen? The creepy voice rumbled out of the cloaked figure. Kabuto was sure a lesser shinobi would have shuddered, he had known the man too long to truly find him intimidating anymore, besides, he still had his uses to the man. He pushed the glasses up his nose before looking back as he answered the large crouched-down figure. Orochimaru's spies last heard the boy was seen leaving the gates after the infiltration mission upon his promotion and apprenticeship to Ibisu. Only rumors so far, but something perhaps to do with Iwa, no one's quite sure, and so far only one person knows of the mission details. That's the Sandaime. Kabuto's voice was calm and almost cheerful, it was amazing the lack of effort it took to fall into this fun-loving persona. The crouched figure in the black cloak and red clouds pondered a moment. Ah, Ibisu-san, It seems that we may have to take care of him after all. Leader Sama will be infuriated if Ibisu teaches the boy his technique. Such a skill was difficult enough for me to re-engineer into Fuinjutsu, and even now it still does not compete well with the man's original. The cloaked figure's voice was rough, as if he was unused to talking. His eyes shifted up to his figurative puppet, the boy had been a useful tool ever since he had sealed the boy, especially when Orochimaru betrayed Akatsuki. He had a great insight upon the man's operations. He eyed Kabuto a moment before nodding to himself, he looked up and stared at his spy, the bandana covering the bottom half of his face, shook a little as his breath eased out. Does anyone suspect you of treason, Konoha Orochimaru? No, Sasori-sama. Kabuto remained still after his full oral report. Sasori pondered this a moment before nodding, he turned around beginning to walk or crawl away, one was fairly unsure how such a being traveled so low to the ground. You didn't see me. Sasori's words echoed out, triggering the secondary seal inside Kabuto's head. The previous days were quickly being rewritten to him studying medical experiments on Orochimaru's Far Eastwards labs. Or at least, that's what would have happened had the seal still been embedded in the boy's brain. Realizing his surroundings, he noticed the figure was gone, like a fart in the wind. Kabuto paused a moment before his face scrunched up in annoyance for a moment before the frown faded, he looked back up towards where Sasori stood moments earlier. Ah, Sasori-san, it seems that you are digging in too close to sensei's plans. I'm afraid he will not be pleased. Kabuto muttered before focusing chakra into his glasses. He looked up to the sky for a moment before looking back in front of him. There standing in front of him was a shimmering image of a black-garbed man, the entire figure clothed in what looked like moving shadows. The only thing that was revealed was his eyes, the shimmering of the image unable to distinguish the color, but they were almost as if they were chips of ice. Ah, sensei, it seems that Sasori-san has finally discovered information upon the boy you have been watching. I know you did not wish for this information to be given up, but I could only buy so much time before my true allegiances would be exposed. I'm afraid that this time it would be prudent to dispatch him like Orochimaru plans. I could convince him of a meeting within the next 3 weeks to dispatch Sasori. It would be unusual for me to gain sudden information for Sasori, but as he has no reason to suspect deception, I would expect him to be unprepared. Kabuto stared calmly at the shimmering image. If he hadn't known the man for as long as he had, he may not have noticed the almost unnoticeable nod. Bowing deeply, Kabuto rose up to see the image gone. Soon, sensei, your plans will come to fruition. But I fear that perhaps you are unaware of the boy's potential, like the other players of this tricky game. Either that, or you understand his potential perfectly. Kabuto looked up a moment before turning back around, leaping into the trees and beginning his long journey back to Konoha. Orochimaru still had some spies that needed to report in after all. Sunagakure. Jin groaned as he flopped onto the very comfortable and very springy mattress, his head burrowing into the pillow quickly. His house or shop, depending on how one would view the outside small stand and shop that used to be his living room, now was filled with papers and scrolls rolled out across any open space that could fit them. Swords, knives, daggers, senbon, and other assortments of weapons and items filled other areas. Workbenches that he had bought were filled up, and some items were threatening to spill over the large spaces and begin to take up his floor. He rolled over lazily as he was glad to be finally off his feet. The day had been long and grueling, and he had twice almost blown his cover. His arms sliding up over his eyes, he breathed through his nose deeply before letting the breath go. He thought over the day carefully. He had been called Jin twice today when he didn't even think about it. He was caught up with conversation with a customer and almost completely ignored the two shinobi. Thankfully, he had brushed it off as being wrapped up in a discussion with a group of farmers that had asked if he could perhaps do something to help their small crops. Oases were good, but farming in the desert was near impossible. However, with seals he pondered, it could be possible. He couldn't allow another slip-up like that again, even if it was just a zoning out, others might be able to brush it off, but his life and his sensei's life depended on this. Ido, or Ibisu rather. He wasn't sure what to call him at the moment, had said that the first few weeks would be the hardest. Always on guard but yet appearing lax and friendly with the shinobi of Suna, the Kazuki had given him a week before informing the rest of Suna that they now had a journeyman seal expert in the village. Of course, it was only several hours later that he had 6 Suna Jounin pounding on his door looking for his father, only after a 20-minute confrontation, and the explanation that Jin was actually the journeyman sealer. Did the Jounin actually make an order? Honestly, they had at first been skeptical, but Jin's work was near flawless. Some of the markings on the explosion tags were distorted, and upon questioning, revealed that the alteration caused the tag to have a bigger boom. After that it went downhill. He had immediately been swamped the following days after that with constant work and people coming in to make new orders, explosion tags, sharpening seals, reinforcement seals on swords. Needless to say Jin was feeling overrun with work after 6 weeks of constant work like that. The only missions he had been put on was to guard the walls. Sure, it was a C-class mission, it didn't pay bad mind you. It was just so boring, but the majority of Jin's work came from his sealing, and that he could not deny. At first his prices that he had posted had caused uproar with most of the shinobi, thinking that giving them safe haven should have been payment enough. But after a quick talk with the cage, Jin's prices remained where they were, and all shinobi had no choice but to pay. Of course, that's not to say that Jin didn't let some costs go for a jutsu or two. He moved his hand away from his eyes as he stared at the ceiling fan. He hadn't completely gotten the hang of this weather yet, but he had picked up a useful trick from Baki actually. He had done a job by adding in some reinforcement seals into the Jounin's flak vest, making it harder to penetrate, but yet still light as it was normally. In return the man had taught him a small elemental chakra manipulation technique. All it was a layering of your chakra over your skin to be a simple suit around you. Doing so created a near-perfect temperature, keeping your body cool or warm depending on the surrounding temperatures, as long as you kept it up. Of course the downside was that the technique drained your reserves fast. However, after almost 6 weeks of constant use with the technique he barely noticed the drain anymore. He sat up as he looked across his bedroom, white walls, the room itself was fairly Spartan-like. He had a dresser across his far side wall, across from his bed, and beside the door taking up the other majority of the wall was a large table, his personal workspace. Standing up lazily, he glided over to the table and let his eyes take in the large circular seal on the paper. The large seal was spiraled and had multiple inscriptions along it. The most curious part about same seal was on his stomach. He looked down and raised his shirt up lazily, molding chakra to his eyes, allowed him to focus clearly upon the seal now showing up on the surface of his abdomen. He had noticed it a few months ago. He had been studying the seal for as long as he had started looking at seals. His only breakthrough however was that it was loosely based upon a storage seal. Aside from that he had no idea what it was. The only other thing he had discovered from it was that he had it since birth. He could tell from the perfect symmetry of the seal, opposed as one would think a seal doesn't grow as the person does, even if scribed onto someone, the seal would be as large or as small as it was originally put on, as it was. Even placing seals directly on a person had effects he could not even imagine at the moment. However, it did give him a pausing thought, perhaps the next prisoner he would get he could experiment on. Shaking his head quickly, he stared at it a bit longer before a small twinge snapped at his senses. Slowly draining the chakra from his eyes, he refocused it towards his ears as he listened in. Sure enough, there it was. Turning around he counted silently to himself as he heard the step, then the other. Looking to the door he let his chakra go as it flowed back into his system. The door opened a few seconds later. Kaido was in his usual sand-colored Suna vest. A sandy-colored turban covered his head, while his black sunglasses were at the end of his nose. He peered over them with his golden-colored eyes, staring into Naruto's sapphire blue for a moment, then he spoke. "Been practicing what I told you, Jin." The man's eyes remained unblinking, unwavering. Had he not been used to the man's stoic gaze, he would have shifted on the spot like a child caught with his hand in the cookie jar. "Hi, father. I have been practicing focusing chakra to my eyes for the past week and a half. Well, you were on your mission like you told me. When focusing I can see up to 300 meters, and I managed to get the night vision down as well." Jin answered calmly. He noticed Kaido's eyes flick to his workspace, noticing the spiral seal. They flicked back and locked his gaze again. "Another seal? What does this one do?" Kaido asked. "I don't know, my best guess is a storage seal, but I am still studying it. I found it in one of the books I picked up from Chiyo-sama." Jin lied smoothly. Kaido had never said he had an understanding in seals past a basic understanding and scripting of explosive seals. There was no point in getting him worried over something that was potentially nothing. Jin frowned inwardly for a moment. Yes, a seal that was the strongest storage seal he had ever seen was a potentially nothing situation, especially when it was branded onto his person. Coming out of his thoughts, he noticed Kaido raise his hand lazily and push his glasses up his nose to cover his eyes. "Come with me, Jin, there's something I wish to show you. A technique that I believe will help you out with your current store needs." Kaido turned and walked out the door without so much as even a glance backwards. Jin followed quickly before closing the door behind him. As he followed Kaido out of the house, he didn't bother locking the door. No one was foolish enough to steal from a shinobi. Not to mention a shinobi that was currently making a popular view upon him by helping almost half the shinobi population of Suna. Jin idly noticed from the direction that the training grounds were their destination. Snapping his eyes to his side near the side alley, his face fell into a stoic mask as he leaped backwards and let the large fist of sand slam into where his previous position was. He reached out his hand and tapped the sand, causing it to fall to the ground uselessly before he disappeared in a swirl of it himself. Gara growled as he felt the kunai pinching into his neck, drawing blood. His blood, he glared balefully ahead of him. "Will you do it, now?" he said bitterly. His mother was always docile whenever Jin was near, especially with that specific kunai near him. He could never find out why. "No, but nice try this time, Gara. Had I been a bit more distracted you would have gotten me," Jin said cheerily from atop the limestone building. The clone behind the boy pulled the kunai away from the Jinchuriki's neck, smiled and patted the boy on the back. "I'll be by for dinner later tonight. Tamari-chan said she wanted me to cook and Kankuro asked a favor about one of his puppets. So I'll talk to you then, Gara. I got to go train with dad for a bit," Jin called out from the rooftop of the limestone building he was standing atop of. He waved lazily before leaping off the rooftop and jogging to catch up to his father. Gara stared at the boys retreating back once more, just like the last time. He would make Jin regret the day he didn't kill him. Mother had been afraid of that boy, and that made him nervous, but he didn't deal with nervousness well. His existence was based around a kill or be killed mindset, and to have someone strong enough to destroy him, but not do it, both confused and angered him. His sand armor slid back up his form before it shot out in a spike, impaling the surprised blonde sand clone behind him. Yes, the boy would certainly rue the day. Training grounds, outskirts of Sunagakure. It seems in order to keep up with both of your customers' demands and my demands as your teacher, you will need to split up, so to speak, Kaido announced once they arrived in the middle of one of the empty training grounds on the outskirts of the village, near the south wall. "Okay, but how do I do that? My clones are good, but the problem is once their first direct order is done, they generally disappear or wait for a command, and I mean if I concentrate I can communicate with them long distance, but it just isn't sensible if I'm on a mission or in the middle of something else," Jin answered. He was thoroughly confused what he was supposed to do about this. Suddenly, in a puff of smoke, an exact replica of Kaido appeared beside the man. He hadn't made a single hand seal, or one that he saw at least. He felt the tingling near his senses of the use of chakra, but it was much lower than he thought it should be. Frowning, he pushed his chakra outwards and dispelled the jinjutsu covering the area, his father still standing there, his clone beside him. "Nice of you to understand that such a technique is too strong to be able to do without the direction and guidance of hand seals. It's called the Kage Bushin no Jutsu. This technique was in the Forbidden Scrolls in Konoha for its especially effective tricks, one being that the clone is completely solid, allowing all the same functions as your regular combat bushins. However, the Kage Bushin no Jutsu is unique in the sense that your chakra is halved with the clone you make. Thus this clone is able to use jutsu unlike most of your others. Another benefit is, once dispelled you gain its memories. It also with half of your chakra gains a sort of conscious thought, an exact replica of you, thus it thinks like you and understands things like you do. So it will continue your work in the seal's workshop while you're on a mission, for example. Now, tell me the downsides, Kaido patiently explained. His cool demeanor didn't change. He eyed Jin carefully as the clone to his right disappeared in another pop of smoke. "Okay, you gain its memories, so I'm going to guess that if you make too many, or too many are dispelled at once, you could gain an injury to your brain functions, anything from severe or mild headaches." Kaido's nod, he continued. "So my next best guess is that considering it's in the Forbidden Scroll and is a powerful technique, it must be chakra expensive, thus only I'd say, Jounin and up are able to use the technique. The other thing I'm guessing is like most clones, one hit one kill." Kaido nodded once more before raising his hands. Jin eyed the man closely as he flipped through 3 seals, then ended on a cross-like seal. Jin nodded before practicing the seals. After a few minutes of doing so, he flipped through the seals, allowing his chakra to flow into the direction of the seal, and watched as 3 puffs of smoke later 3 identical clones appeared next to him. He felt a drain, but it wasn't much. Kaido nodded. "Very good, Jin. Now, I want you to send out 2 clones in a V formation, with the 3rd clone going up the middle. Get a feel for your distance on the technique. When you feel them dispel, I want you to create more, go through a 1, 3, 2 cycle. It should differ up the control needed so that you get used to the amount needed for the clones. I estimate that at your current reserves, you should be able to create about 100 clones before you hit the point to stop before coming to the danger of chakra exhaustion. Thus I want you to make 50 clones before sundown, afterwards you may continue your day as you wish. Jin nodded as the 3 clones tore away towards the village in the formerly discussed formation. Kaido raised his hand to make a seal before Jin spoke up. Kaido-sensei, if I may ask. Why did you have me trained to focus chakra to my eyes, aside from the great work it does on my sensory outlook? Kaido looked at him a moment. After a few minutes the boy was about to tell him never mind. You will learn my technique. One that most have foolishly referred to as a bloodline. Foolishly most believe that a dijutsu is a bloodline technique. Little do they understand that this technique is only a dijutsu, an eye technique. The true definition of the name, the only dijutsu that I know that can be taught. It was created long ago, truly when it was thought to have been lost through time. It has been passed from master to apprentice along the line. I will teach it to you in the coming weeks. There is no choice in this, you will learn it. I have often given your thoughts consideration about anything I teach you, with few exceptions. This will be one. This technique is the most important of anything I will teach you. If you have any attachment to the color of your eyes, Jin, I suggest you memorize them now. After you learn it sufficiently and master it, your eyes will be the same as mine. Jin stared at him a moment. He wasn't sure how to think about losing the only connection to his biological parents. Pondering about it, he slowly thought about all the people that had teased him, laughed at him and threw things at him, scowled at him or glared at him. His parents should have been there for him to protect him from that, and if they weren't they should have set up somebody to watch out for their boy. They didn't want him and didn't care for him. I don't care about my eyes, my family gave me up from birth, father, and you're the only one that has ever taken care of me, even if you're not my real father by blood. As far as I'm concerned, if my family isn't dead I wish they were. Kaido eyed Jin, careful at the almost spiteful tone the boy used. He nodded. If I had a son, I would have wanted him to be like you. Jin. Kaido's words were slow. He had to think about them for a moment, but after thinking them over he realized them to be true. Jin's eyes widened before Kaido nodded to him once more. Regardless, continue your exercise and get some rest in the next few days. The Kazuki has assigned us a mission. We will be on a recon mission farther out to the far southwestern desert. There is a small village there that has recently stopped its contact with outsiders. Baki, you and myself have been dispatched to find out why. For all intents and purposes you will be leading the mission. This is an evaluation, but don't mistake it, you will be the leader in the mission until a hostile situation where you are ill-prepared to handle is to come up. Understood? At Jin's nod Kaido finished his seals before disappearing in a whirlwind of sand. Jin watched the sand that used to be his sensei's form disappear into the wind. He squinted his eyes in a mental pain as the awkward pushing feeling he had in his brain appeared twice more. Memories of the 2 corners of the wall of the village, speaking with guards asking why he was there, popped into his mind. He rubbed his eyes a moment, willing the slight pressure in his head to dissipate. He waited a few seconds as it ebbed away before creating a single clone. He sent him running off, beginning the sequence of his training. Man are located in east end of Sunagakure. Ah hey Jin, you wanna come look at the puppet for me? I'm really interested to see if you can do any of that dumb shit like you were spouting earlier. Kankuro wasn't wearing his normal uniform, instead he stood holding on to the railing of the quiet exquisite stairway in a normal long baggy sandy pants with a black t-shirt on. The makeup on his face was washed off, and he looked oddly normal. Kankuro, don't be stupid you baka, he has to cook dinner first, after all he promised me he would. Tell him. Jin. Kuntamari swooned as she moved in from the large archway leading towards the nearly, from what he knew, spotless kitchen. Ma, it'll do, both just calm down with a single hand seal. A second Jin popped into existence with a puff of smoke beside him, the clone moving towards the stairs almost immediately. Kankuro, whose dejected look quickly changed to one of happiness. That boy is just too happy about his puppets to be healthy, Jin thought to himself as he walked forward, hugging Tamari as he did so. Moving past her he felt her presence following behind him, moving along with him towards the kitchen. Looking up to the ceiling as he felt Gaara's distinct signature upon the roof of the home, like usual. For a moment he pondered about having Niji's silly eye ability. The Hyuga had been a stuck-up prick. He had been in Niji's graduating class the year before. He had failed of course, but reflecting upon it, it had not been his fault. With his insight now he realized that unless they were very lucky, none of the genin in that room would have gotten those answers right. The very irate Mizuki had switched his test, not like he would have passed anyhow, due to his horrible abilities at the Bushin no Jutsu at the time. His chakra control sucked. Thinking on it, he was glad he had told Sarutobi about that one. He hadn't seen the man again after that, but then again he found out now with his security clearance. He knew Mizuki had been a traitor. The full details weren't disclosed as he was still fairly low on the food chain, but needless to say he had nearly killed 3 shinobi and attempted stealing the forbidden death was quick as the man had been good, but he was no Anbu. Shaking his head, he cleared the thoughts of his previous classmates before focusing on the stirring pot. He wasn't sure, but cooking quickly put him into a relaxed mood. Shifting his vision, he noticed Tamari staring at him rather closely and fairly obviously, if her sitting with her chin in her hand turned towards him sitting at the table was any indication. "Do I have something on my face?" he asked briefly, reaching a hand up to rub across his mouth to remove what must have been there. She snorted and shook her head, her blonde locks shacking merrily as she did so. "No, you idiot, you just get a really peaceful look on your face when you cook. I mean, we've had your food every night for the past 3 weeks, and if you pay attention you get really zoned in while you're cooking." She didn't know why she was pointing out such a useless fact, almost from when she could walk her father had been teaching her about proper etiquette of a shinobi. She knew 17 different ways to kill him with the spatula he had in his hand, but then again she knew she didn't have the skill to take Jin on. There was something about him, his walk, his stance, like he was always on guard. There was of course, the other fact of him being able to suppress Gaara's sand and keep him in a dormant mood. Though he would easily get angry later on when Jin left, the two could never get along, or at least Gaara couldn't get along with Jin. "Yeah, I suppose, I did it ever since I was a kid, never had anyone to cook for me, so I had to do it myself." Jin's voice was low, and the tone he used was the weariest she had ever heard him. She raised an eyebrow. "But your father? Adopted?" "Oh," she said carefully. It was a startling revelation that the two were not blood, but looking at it now they didn't do anything overly father-son-like. The man was a great shinobi, and even when he was on free time, the penetrating gaze of those blank golden eyes crept her out. Baki had admitted to her on one occasion, on threat of torture and death, should she reveal it to anyone, that the man's gaze unsettled him as well. "My dad found me he yelled as he started patting down his chest suddenly, backing up he threw the spatula down, before turning to the doorway leading to the stairs. His sudden shift startled Tamari out of her thoughts. Why she didn't get to finish as Jin roared. "God damn it, Kankuro. Don't use that fucking flamethrower in the house, you sack of shit. Do you have any idea how much that stings?" It was unusual to hear Jin yell or use that much profanity before. She raised her eyebrow once again as he turned back to her, suddenly remembering her there. His face heated up and grew red with a blush. "The bast Kankuro set off his puppet's flamethrower to test out the seal that I put on it, more oil in the canister, by making the inside of it bigger than the outside. A neat little seal I picked up through one of Chiyo-sama's books. Only useful on smaller devices, but still nifty nonetheless." Jin sheepishly turned back to the boiling pot of what he called spaghetti. He shook his head, it hadn't really hurt as the clone didn't transfer the physical sensations back, but the sudden thought change and interruption of your chest being on fire would startle anyone. "So where'd you get that recipe from again?" Tamari asked in curiosity. It seemed like Jin had been a few places before his desertion from Konoha. "Picked it up from a small village east of the Iowa border. The guy that I got it from said he got it from a traveling merchant from Kumo. Apparently it's a good dish up there. Got to say I got hooked on it ever since I knew about it." His answer was what she expected, always from a person somewhere. "Speaking of which, Jin, if you don't mind me asking, you seem like such a nice guy, you're a powerful shinobi, but I mean Konoha isn't really that well known for being aggressive to its own without valid reason. Why did you get kicked out of Konoha?" She almost regretted asking when he tensed up. It seemed the room got chillier as she pulled her light baby blue sweater tighter around her, letting the sleeves slide over her hands as she watched him carefully. "I experimented with seals, he said carefully. He was still stirring, but it was more for something for his hands to do, Tamari thought. On people. She didn't get to finish her question, but his answer had been a shock. Shinobi from the start were taught that seals on a person were dangerous at best and catastrophes at worst. Sure, it sounded great at first, resistant seal to make your skin harder. Sure, hard enough that it causes an increase in weight upon your bone structure, literally crushing you to death. Want to breath underwater? No problem, but now that we have that seal there, may I remind you, you're going to be living in water the rest of your life, as the seal alters the lungs into gills." These were only some of the examples that most shinobi were taught from the beginning to get those silly ideas out of their head. The fact that this boy, a very good sealing journeyman in fact, was using them on people, on purpose, with full knowledge of what they would probably do, left a bad taste in her mouth. "Why?" she asked carefully. Looking over, she noticed Kankuro standing still in the doorway. His mouth was open, and he had heard and also understood the situation. "Any genin worth their salt would. My dream is to be a great seal master. I need to understand everything about them to do that. I can't go by theory upon why seals don't work scribed onto people. The thing about seals is you need to think outside the box, so maybe I could find a way to do something different and to make skin scribed seals work." 17 trials, only 2 successes, I can barely even call them that. The entire issue with seal scribing onto a person is sacrifice. Seals generally require a sacrifice, be it blood, chakra or otherwise. The entire issue with seals grafted onto a person is that to activate a seal you push chakra and a seal will activate by the sacrifice. Jin quickly turned the stove off as he sat down to stir. He turned around leaning back on the stove staring at the siblings. The issue that comes up with this is a person, anything really, is naturally creating and drawing chakra, even civilians. Most don't understand it fully, but the chakra that we naturally generate will actually activate the seal. Now obviously there are some seals that have different effects but still lead to some of the same problems. Summoning however is one seal that could be scribed upon you. Orochimaru for example is well known for his arm snake summoning seal. In order to use it, it not only requires chakra but blood as well. However, the main reason why the seal even works in the first place is you using a strand of chakra to contact the realm you are initiating the summon of, thus in Orochimaru's case the Hibibakisauchi. That strand of chakra isn't actually summoning a creature, it's just making contact. The summon that finds it uses the strand to tug themselves into our realm. Issues that come up with attempting to graft storage seals onto oneself becomes the problem of the natural production of chakra our bodies make, activating the seal, and thus in some cases, actually suck the person in on themselves. Or in the most average case it merely sucks away the person's chakra and begins draining them constantly and quickly. If I could figure it out why or maybe even prevent it, I would be the most renowned seal master in the world. Or even in history, alas, I have theories, but all theories must be tested. That is the deal I have worked out with your father, any prisoners they no longer need I am allowed to experiment on. Jin's voice carried an almost casual or offhand tone to it. Tamari held in the shudder she felt as she just eyed the boy momentarily. With just that conversation she felt an almost sudden change with the boy. Sure he was still a friend and maybe in a few years she could consider him for other things, but he was dangerous. That was certain. Ankuro moved into the room and sat down at a chair beside Tamari. Jin eyed the spaghetti a minute before pulling out the plates from a nearby cupboard with practiced ease. He knew most of the things in here now. Looking up he smiled. 2 scoops or 1. Southwestern area of Wind Country, 8 miles out from Yuzu village. Baki was currently hunched over panting. This had not been what he had been expecting at all. The mission was an evaluation of Jin, and it was to be a quick in and out, maybe disease, maybe just a few messengers getting lost in the village. But not that, apparently Kaido and Jin were spies from Konoha, and Kaido had been sneaking out unseen and killing of messengers to create this opening. Once they found out that all the messengers had been dispatched at the scheduled times they had fallen back outside the village to discuss the issue. It was a great shock when Kaido revealed it was him who had been dispatching the messengers. That was of course the only warning that Baki had gotten before his knee had been nearly shattered by a vicious sidekick by Jin. Of course the boy wasn't as good as him, so he did manage to at least break a rib if the snapping sound was anything to go by. However Kaido had pushed him back and initiated combat. It was a grueling 3 minutes before Baki realized he had no hope to win. Only by the grace of a blunder by Jin's attack he was able to escape. Of course that was almost an hour ago, and since it had been an hour of cat and mouse, him not making much ground, but them never gaining. It was almost like they were baiting you. A voice spoke from behind him. His instincts kicked in before he could truly register the words. He whipped around from the sand dune he had been laying behind and quickly sent a kunai towards the voice's direction. He was disappointed to see the shocked face of Jin disappear in a puff of smoke as the boy's clone was destroyed, growling at being so thoroughly stumped by a boy no less. He leaped up and was about to begin his leap when he noticed his lack of mobility. Looking down his eyes widened as he saw 2 tanned hands gripping his legs in a vice grip. He was about to substitute before he heard the voice behind him. Don't panic, you're no use to us dead. It was the last thing he heard before a searing pain erupted at the back of his neck and his vision splotched into white dots before blackness overtook him. Same location, 3 hours later. Jin eyed the man lazily before shifting his focus to his father. Kaido had been fairly blunt when Jin had asked if either had any thoughts. The only reason for such to-the-point response was to take out the other shinobi. Jin hadn't questioned, his instincts told him to do what he had to, and he had followed them. The gaping difference in his training and the Jounins wasn't as wide as he thought, but with the drop on the man and Kaido's help he couldn't be sure. What are we going to do if not kill him? Jin asked blankly. He was a little worried about killing Baki, considering Tamari and Kankuro were so fond of the man. Eyes widening he quickly dropped his face into a blank mask. And think like that, they're a mission, they're potential enemies. Remember you're a Konoha, not a Sunin. His thoughts bounced in his head a moment before he noticed Kaido staring at him. Shifting his vision to the black-garbed man he awaited a response. I will now show you my technique, he said monotonously. They both changed their vision to the tied-up sand Jounin in front of them. Anything to be used to escape had been confiscated and his half-turban face covering had been removed. Apparently eye contact was needed for this technique. We will wake him up in a moment, but first I will explain my technique. This is called the Akikagen. Like I said earlier, most confuse a Dijutsu with a bloodline. This is false, as a Dijutsu truly just means eye technique. During my mission you were practicing not only channeling chakra into your eyes, but doing it in a unique manner by allowing it to flow from pupil outwards, correct? At Jin's nod, Kaido continued. Very well, you have gotten the hang of that training. Now this will be the only time you need to activate this technique, because after you complete it this first time it will always be active. With your naturally high reserves you won't even feel the small drain on your reserves, but there will be a larger drain when the full technique takes effect. This technique will completely hypnotize your opponent. With that, as long as your mind can fix the situation to what you want, you can practically lead your enemy to believe anything he wants. The true reason that this technique is so deadly is it requires very little chakra and is highly effective. The reason for this is it's using the opponent's own chakra against them. Using Baki here as an example, when he looks into your eyes you will be able to use hypnosis to have him use his own chakra to put him into a constant hypnotic state. With this he will think that he has been spying for you all the time. Thus he will be completely loyal. If at all he ever discovers this technique you can either kill him or wipe his memory by hypnotizing him again. This technique is the very reason my spy network is the greatest in the elemental nations. It is why Jiraiya-sama himself cannot infiltrate my network, though his is wide and great, mine is completely loyal, and the dangerous part is, anyone who makes eye contact with me is at risk. All you need is one look, a few seconds is all that it takes to fall to the technique. That is why this technique is so dangerous and so unknown. At Jin's confused face, Kaido raised his hand, making sure the boy remained quiet. Nodding, he continued. Let me explain, Jin. The Hokage knows of my technique. He knows that all shinobi are civilians, or whoever I catch in this technique is loyal. He knows what it does, but he does not know how. As far as he knows, like everyone else, it is a bloodline. He of course knows that I'm going to give it to you, however he believes that it will be through a series of blood transfers. Of course such a thing is generally frowned upon, as the other clans dislike the idea of making a half-breed. But as you so rightly know, I don't care what they think. Now I'll explain to you about the chakra usage more. Like I said earlier, it is relatively small, but when a mark has come up with information that they think is valuable to you, they use their connection with you to flare their chakra. In doing so they activate a larger amount of drain on your technique. Of course it feels a bit like an itching sensation, but you get used to it. I must let you know this, however. This technique can last while you're sleeping, unconscious or otherwise. It's a fail-safe so you don't lose your contacts, but with that, if you're suffering from extreme chakra exhaustion and you lose consciousness, there is a high potentiality you could die. Now Jin, I want you to hypnotize Baki. You must do it to learn this technique. And you must make him our spy. He is close to the Kazekage. He will know of things we must know, and Konoha must know before anyone else. Do what you wish for how he thinks he's your spy, but he must be loyal to you. Kaido's voice grew serious at the end of his explanation before he pulled out a small white packet. Breaking it open, he wafted it under Baki's nose, and the man went wide-eyed and struggled as he startled awake. His eyes focused as he quickly clued into his situation. He became still, extremely so. He stared at both men, glaring balefully. They will hunt you down for this, Konoha scum. You think we wouldn't suspect you too after the way we brought you in? Baki's voice was venomous as he spat onto the heated sand below them. Jin focused chakra into his pupil like he had trained before. He began to push it slowly like waves towards the outside of his eyes. He continued this cycle as he spoke. Baki, at the call of the man's name, he looked at the boy viciously. After a few moments, however, his face grew blank. His eyes seemed to glaze over as if he was staring right through the boy. Kaido stood back watching carefully. Amazing to think he got it right on his first try. Interesting. He truly is uniquely skilled at this, more so than I ever imagined. Kaido continued watching before Baki's eyes once again closed and he fell forward unconscious into the sand. He moved behind Jin before catching the boy as he fell, the sweat dripping off the boy's face, not at all from the hot sun of the desert. Ah, yes, the first one is always fairly taxing. Kaido mentioned offhandedly. He felt his apprentice's glare before he let go, and the boy fell with an undignified yelp into the sand. Standing up and brushing off the sand from his back, he cut the wires loose from Baki before re-equipping the man. Kaido lifted Baki up before lifting him into a fireman's carry. After adjusting the rather large man to a position that felt comfortable, he turned to Jin once more. Our contact is waiting. The meeting was scheduled for tonight 4 hours north of here. You can make it in 2 if you run the whole way. Be careful, Jin. The boy nodded before turning around and taking off into the searing hot desert. His golden eyes following the boy over his black sunglasses. After a moment he turned and began his route to the Muzu village. 20 miles north, 6 hours later. The crackling of the fire almost covered the breaking of the twig to his left. He held in the instant reaction to attack first and ask later. He stared across at the grey-robed man. For some reason, though grey, it blended into the trees very well. The man was tall but lanky, short dirty blonde hair, and was young, older than him, but younger than Ibisu. Naruto stared at the man carefully for a moment. The stance told him of a very combat-capable shinobi. Given the amount of weight pressed onto his right foot, he would easily say the man was right-handed. A large senbon was in between the man's teeth. Yo, he said with a happy smile as he waved his hand lazily. A twitch developed in Naruto's right eye, but he quickly suppressed it. He motioned to the log beside him, and the man moved forward to sit upon the seat. They stared into the fire for what seemed like hours before the man spoke. The wind can easily blow out a fire. I think Naruto didn't acknowledge him for a moment. He eyed the fire wearily. This cloak and dagger thing was sometimes annoying. But that's what he signed up for. He shifted his gaze to the man watching him. The senbon in the man's mouth was gleaming in the firelight. His right hand was tensed. If it wasn't for having to study Abisu so much for movements, he could have missed it. But can just as easily ignite it into an inferno, Naruto replied calmly. The man nodded and faded away, like a ghost in the wind. Where he was sitting a moment ago was now a manila-colored envelope. He idly wondered why they were always manila. Slipping his finger under the opening, he tore it open before discarding the envelope into the fire, feeding the blaze. He eyed the message before grimacing. Tossing the paper into the flame, he turned and jumped off into the trees. He had a long trip. The burning paper showed only a few words before they burned away into ash. Naruto-kun, no, or, that Tsunade. The paper burned away before finally its information disappeared from existence. The only proof a meeting had went on was the now slowly burning out campfire. Sunagakure, Kazukiyage's office, 18 hours later. The Kazukiyage eyed him momentarily. After knowing the man for as long as he did, he knew the man was awaiting his report on Jin and Kaido. If he gave the man the okay, then Jin could be further used to help support the Chunin missions they had been getting lately. Kaido was already of use on the Jounin and above missions, but the fact that sending another Jounin on a mission easily set for one was getting bothersome. But if they were not to be trusted, then they would be dead in their beds tonight before they could realize it. Of course, that's what the Kazukiyage thought at least. He passed Kazukiyage-sama. I believe the months have passed and proven that both are quite capable and trustworthy. Especially with the risk earlier of giving Jin the books from Chiyodono, but it paid off. Baki's voice was calm, not even a hint of defiance, not even a hint of wrath for the man that had ordered his wife pregnant with his daughter to death, not a hint of the knowledge that Baki was leading this man to his ultimate downfall, when soon to lead an invasion to Konoha in a couple of years, not to a completely oblivious Konoha as one may think, but a fully armed, fully prepared Konoha with two of the three, Densetsu no Sanin. He hid his grin. This man would fall, and Konoha would prevail. The Kazukiyage stared at Baki a moment before nodding, signaling to his Anbu. The man nodded before disappearing to relieve the squad currently watching the Nadana family. If Baki, his right-hand man, said they could be trusted, then he had two new shinobi for Suna. He grinned as he spun in his chair, waving away Baki. He would have a Chunin specialized in stealth watching young Jin for a few more months. After all, you couldn't let a dog have too much reach on his chain, or he might just bite someone. Kaido, however, he would have Baki check in on randomly. He couldn't afford to have a Jounin or Anbu watching those two. Well, the village needed all the money they could get. He cursed. That damn daimyo was grating on his nerves as of late. He has been looking especially close to their movements as of late and had been cutting funding towards his forces. Standing up, he moved over to the small arched window overlooking his village. It was humorous to think that in 2 years' time, he would bring Konoha, the most powerful shinobi village of its time, to its knees. Then he would see if his daimyo would continue to squander his village, to see him cower before him, the Kazukiyage. 7 months later, city inside, border of grass country. Jin grinned as he increased his speed. It hadn't taken him that long, and he had barely noticed the Chunin that had been tailing him for most of his missions. But the boy had no idea about how useful the Kage Bushin no Jutsu was, and for that he was thankful, not like it mattered now anyway. It seems the Chunin had been pulled off his tail, and he had free rein again. It had taken almost 6 months of constant work to find Tsunade. Shaking down old bookies and intimidating Yakuza dealers was tasking, but he had picked up a lead. Then it was only a month later he had been able to shake the Chunin on him by switching himself with a clone and running off. However, the bright side was that the Chunin was pulled off before coming on this one. That's why he was now moving at breakneck speeds towards Kasukado City, home to the 2-week Kasukado poker tournament. Such a thing didn't interest him, however. Even though his luck was extraordinary when it came to gambling and cards, he had never been that interested, but his interest was in the fact that he had solid evidence of a blonde-haired woman in her early 20s heading to the city with her black-haired traveling companion and a pig. Needless to say, normally a blonde woman in her 20s and traveling companions wouldn't interest Jin at all, but this was Tsunade of the Sanin, the woman he was tasked with bringing back to Konoha. It wasn't a shock that Suna was preparing for war. The signs were quite obvious to the observant onlooker, and for that Tsunade was needed back in her home, just like Jiraiya-sama was called back as well. He pushed chakra to his feet and let it explode under him as the cause of too much chakra on the tree branch sent him shooting into the air. His grin spread into a full smile, seeing the village up ahead, his mission was half complete. Asakato City. Jin shuffled the deck skillfully, his hands never faltering, and the cards almost flowed through the air like water. His eyes however were locked with a chestnut brown pair staring at him from across the table. There was of course the black-haired apprentice of the woman that he was staring at sitting at the table. However, she was not interested in this current discussion nor the cards in her hand. He had initiated the code phrase that she would know he was here on the Hokage's orders. They had sat down and were playing a game to discuss the situation. There will be a war, you are requested back to serve your country. Jin's voice cut through the slight tension in the booth they were in, his eyes never wavering, nor showing any bit of the emotion he was feeling. It wasn't every day you met a Sannin up close after all, and not to mention her almost blank stare was enough to start to mess with his nerves as well. I refuse, she said blankly. She looked at the two cards in her hand before locking gazes with him again. He sighed, they had told him it would not be easy, and she would be difficult. He changed his gaze down to his cards, he nodded to himself as he looked up. You cannot. His voice was steel. It almost sent Tsunade reeling the amount of power and authority that voice held. But she was not a Sannin for nothing. Her glare nearly sent Jin cowering, if not for that blank mask that didn't even flinch upon receiving the withering glare. Perhaps I should now tell you the actual mission briefing. Due to the upcoming war, all active Konoha shinobi outside the village on long-term assignment are being called back. That includes you. As your long-term assignment is up, you are to report back to the Hokage. He tried again. He really didn't want to force the Sannin to go back as he was sure he would receive a large headache for trying. I refuse. She answered once more. He sighed. You leave me no choice, Tsunade of the Sannin. By the order of the Hokage of Konohagakure, you are under arrest and are to surrender immediately. You will go back to Konoha if it's the last thing I do. He stood up, placing his cards down, and glanced at the squealing pig now hiding under the table. His eyes switched to the open-mouthed apprentice and then back to the scowling Sannin.